Just so you all know, the camera and microphones are on.
Got it.
Thank you.
That's what it said. Hi, Dan. How are you?
Gotta go to contacts. Oh, thanks. Yeah.
Gray and white striped sweater, gray and white striped mask. That's
We gotta step it up.
still have this thing. I don't know what we're supposed to do with it, but it's here. I know it's been good, but just spinning. Yeah.
No, this is.
Mhm. Always so intimidating. Dan's plugging in. How's everybody looking? Looks like folks are settled in. Move my computer from in front of my microphone. I see it's 4 o'clock. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We will start the work session portion of the day. And we have agenda item number 1, which is the Peninsula Recreation Area Slopeside Hall Project, additional services and proposals. And Diane, you, Susan, okay. Susan's ready, but we'll turn it over.
I got
to
her back.
Diane.
I'll move back.
We will tag you.
Perfect. I like
Yeah.
it. Thank you. Welcome. Good to see you guys.
Yeah, thank you. Good to see all of you as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. This afternoon, you have in front of you 3 additional services proposals for the Slope Hall project at the Peninsula Recreation Area. If you'll recall, at the July 13th meeting, Mr. Bob McDonald with OLC presented a site layout and conceptual design for this new building out at the Peninsula Recreation Area. They're supportive of the building and the direction it was going. It is on schedule at this time to be in front of the Planning Commission on October 21st. As a part of this project, though, and as a part of this whole plan, you had asked us to look at the site a little bit more holistically, meaning take into account some of the other master plan items and get us some numbers. So we did that. So the 3 that you'll see in front of you this evening, one is for the design cost for an exterior tube storage enclosure at the cost of $31,390. If you'll recall, the original design had the tubes in the new building. At the May 25th meeting, we reviewed the information and made the decision at that time to not include the tubes in that new building, but to keep them separate. This would be for the design of that separate building. They're currently in cargo containers. And as much as we like to think we could just keep that look out there, at some point in time, we would need to follow our code and design that to make it look a lot nicer as well. The second one is for the design of the day lodge elevator and the kitchen. So that also came as part of the master plan, was to actually improve the event space and the revenue opportunities for the day lodge by expanding the kitchen and adding an elevator. The design costs for that are at a cost of $35,222. The third one is for the design of the expanded community plaza, and that's at a cost of $49,280. And that expanded community plaza accounts for the larger area, the grading, as well as it's really looking at it more like the pocket park, as Susan likes to say, I'm taking her words, the pocket park with this additional gathering space, different amenities out in that space as well. So all 3 of those are in front of you tonight. Should you choose to want to move forward with one of those additional services, we would bring a contract back to you at the next meeting in September for your approval. We also want to verify with you at this point in time the question about ice. So ice is not included in this plan. There's no studio sheet, there is no ice circle, and there is no ice trail. If you recall, at the August 10th meeting, we gave you results. Susan presented these results with the consulting team for the ice feasibility study. And at that time, he directed us to focus our efforts on the Meadow Creek Park and to improvements to that park, which are underway at this point in time in terms of collecting that information and what those costs would be. But of course, we want to make sure that that is where we are going, especially should you choose to make these changes to the community plaza. It does not include ice at this point in time. We just wanted to confirm that with you. Did I forget anything, Susan? No?
That's good.
And with that, we'd like your feedback.
Thank you both. Can you, I know it was in your staff report, can you remind me again there was one that kind of floated to the top in the priority list.
Yeah, that was for the expansion of that community plaza. Yeah, with the idea there being it really does connect the entire site. So with the current day lodge, the new building, it would connect everything and make it just a beautiful area, right? It makes it all work. It makes it, we heard comments that you wanted to have more of a park there, have potentially some more public art in that area, wanted to have some better wayfinding, some better signage, all of that would be incorporated into that area.
I was just gonna say, you could note the site plan in the packet, and you'll see kind of just, there's gonna be a gap between what we have existing today and this proposed new building. And the original scope of work for OLC did include landscaping directly adjacent to the building and tying into the sidewalk network, but it really doesn't encompass sort of a more comprehensive plan for that plaza area, which ultimately is part of the vision plan and where we'd like to go with the site plan for the PRA.
You have questions, feedback? Jump in.
Yes, so it'll be the same team that we have currently, but more heavy on Norris's time for that portion of the work.
I guess,
Happy to-
yeah.
Thank you. I think we should approve this personally, but we should also get creative with how we're gonna pay for this. Right, like, there's a number of things we could do. We could potentially rent out each of these landscaped areas to different businesses or something and, create a new revenue stream there. Or something like that, but the extra work is gonna absolutely take time and effort and is my faith.
Are you, Andy, are you specifically speaking to the landscaping side of thing, or all three of them?
Well, basically all three to make this thing right, to do what we gotta do.
Okay.
It's gonna encompass these things, and this is just a start, this is just for planning. So we gotta think about where the rest of it's gonna come from as well. And I just, would urge us to get creative beyond some of the things we've done, and I think we're gonna talk more about that later.
And Andrew, I do see on the screen there, but I'll try to remember. I don't know how you can best get my attention when you want to chime in. Otherwise, just start speaking, Andrew, and we'll.
I can unmute and chime in.
Perfect.
I'll get your attention, I promise. So, well, one to the questions at hand. One is, I thought we did remove the ice. I think this seems to just be a formality of having it off the plan. The kitchen, or the kitchen idea, I think we need to do it, but I don't think we should be spending $30,000 or whatever the number was in planning for a kitchen when we're not moving walls, we're not redesigning the facility. Dan, I think you could probably speak more intelligently than I can to the reality of having an equipment company come in and do most of that work. If we're just saying we just need new, more efficient, more effective equipment to make it more functional. I think kitchen equipment companies would be happy to participate, as opposed to, no disrespect to the experts, but paying more experts to do that instead. The shed, on that one, my view is very much that right now we're using containers. I thought we were just basically gonna grade an area and put on a good looking pole barn. Again, spending that kind of money, I'm not sure if we need to be doing that. And as far as the landscaping goes, I do think we need to make the courtyard look right. My question, I believe earlier, was we're spending $60,000 on design of the courtyard. The important question is, how much are we prepared to spend on construction of the courtyard? Because if it's $1 million, then that's probably not an unreasonable number. If it's $100,000, then that's ridiculous. So that's where I am on the 4 topics at hand.
$12,000
find it. I think, and I had this conversation with Diane earlier today, in reference to one of the questions, Andrew, that you posed, I think, about the kitchen. I think indeed they are looking at ultimately taking down that wall and moving it to the vestibule. So that's why that dish area would be moved. And if my recent experience has any value in terms of engaging structural engineers and design drawers and things of that nature, these prices seem to be pretty much in line. So, I mean, I don't think you can get somebody to put pen to paper for less than 15 grand. So I would say that I think that in terms of looking at that kitchen and what we're trying to do there, yes, I have a much higher degree of comfort with a restaurant design firm coming in, because there's a lot of little nuanced parts in the kitchen you want to make sure are in place. You know, if you're gonna have a gas line, you're gonna need a hood, you're gonna want refrigeration, you're gonna need power, you're gonna need floor drains. You know, you start moving stuff. So the design, I think that design number is probably about right. In terms of the community plaza, yeah, Andrew, good point, but I really don't know what we're trying to do there. I don't know, Diane, if it's the kind of thing that you could break into components and put each out to bid, like, I just don't know. So, you know, in terms of our time frame, yeah, you want this kind of to be coming together when the building's built. So I put this on about a 2-year time track, right? So we might have time from the plaza design perspective to look at something else, but I don't really know really what we're trying to do. I think I'd like to keep it as much as possible with the people who have up to this point been charged with and I think I'm going to probably segue this to Melissa now, thematically kind of pull this together and make sure they understand if there's some components that are more integrative, how that could play together. But I don't know that the same company necessarily has to do all this, and there might be a better way to look at it, but that's outside my purview for sure. So let's pass it along. I know I didn't clear anything up, but I'll pass it along to Melissa anyway.
No, I support it. I think, these are high numbers. I think to Andy's point, the money has to come from somewhere. But I think they're in line with market standards right now. I am most interested in that plaza. I know I've been asking you questions for years about it, and this is where we can finally see a real design that pulls everything together. I think we all know what's expected in that, and especially if the same team is doing it, they're well aware of the elements that we're looking for. And so, yeah, I look forward to seeing the final designs.
I agree with one thing that Andrew brought up that I had a question on. It was on the tube storage, because that does seem like almost like, obviously not prefab, but a fairly straightforward, simple structure for that much. Is that kind of in like, is there any cost savings there? Is that just kind of what it takes to get the flat work and everything else?
This is always a fun conversation. So per our design regulations within the town, our development code, we can't just put a pole barn up to screen the tube storage. It would have to follow the same design standards, the same regulations, the same building codes as everything else we do. So I think there's always this, can't we just throw up a shed for the tubes? We can keep the shipping containers. We can put a fence around the shipping containers. There's definitely different ways to do it. But if we're going to build an enclosed storage structure that people are going to be coming in and out of and working in, it has to meet all of our development code regulations.
I think I know I'm on board with that, and I definitely
Okay.
we should be like, yeah, we should, we need to uphold what our code is. I just think like, we're proposing like a conditioned indoor space for those tubes, or just like cold storage, bring them in, drop them off, their ceiling lights, and not much more than that. But I guess is where I was a little not sure.
I think with the final design for it is kind of up in the air. There was talk of having some indoor space that they could actually work on equipment and work on
Okay.
things inside. So it's a little bit gray. And so I think this design cost was to kind of like suss out all those details to figure out exactly what it is we need, the square footage we need. And this is to take that design all the way to 80% CDs, so to be able to apply for a building permit for those plans. Is that overkill at this point? Potentially, you know, could we get a little further down the road and then decide exactly what it is we want to do with the tube storage? I think so. This is what it would cost to go ahead and jump in with the design process for a building for the tubes.
Thank you. That was, yeah, that was the, not sure where, what, you know, seems like that's, I got a catalog we can find a good design from, but I'm with you now. Thank you. And as for the ice, I think I'm kind of, yeah, I think let's focus, for me personally, I think Meadow Creek's still the best place. Let's focus on yourself. Second best place. But at this point, the place we're gonna
It's the
focus,
most expedient.
it's the most
It's the
expedient
second
place.
best
Yeah,
way.
yeah. So,
Is there, I'm sorry to jump in terms of the kitchen design, it makes sense, I think, to Melissa's point, I think, to have that kind of, that internal collaboration on the community space, you know, the people who are working on that building around it. In terms of the kitchen space and the elevator, maybe even the elevator, but the kitchen space, is it possible to break that out and look for a commercial kitchen design firm that can just kind of come in and knock that out separately?
Yes, absolutely.
I think we had this conversation before. This particular company does not have a lot of experience in terms of kitchen design, or especially commercial kitchen design. Is that correct?
Yeah, as you and I were talking earlier, I don't know, I can't speak on that. From
Oh.
like from everything I've seen with them, I've not seen the kitchen aspect of things, but I can't
They've
answer
got-
that fully.
They've got somebody internally who, you know, has some experience with them, fine. You know, otherwise I wouldn't mind seeing that, maybe, somebody else take a look at that.
I'd agree. Marina long ago.
Not complicated, I like to just do it once.
So everybody good with all, moving all three of these?
Hunter, can I
Yep.
get somebody to say out loud what we're talking about in cost for the plaza again, to the point of spending 60,000? Are we talking, what are we going to tell the experts the hemisphere budget is, and they will design around that, as opposed to them telling us, giving us a Cadillac and then finding out we only have the money for a Chevy?
So their design fees, I can jump in, their design fees are about $50,000. Their cost estimate, they were estimating based on the square footage and the types of amenities that we kind of verbally have discussed. They're thinking that's going to be about a $500,000 project mid-range. Typical design, landscape design cost, that's pretty in line with 10% of your landscape budget. So those are the numbers that they have in mind when they put this proposal together.
Okay, and that's in addition to the 5.2 for the building, right? That's the current number.
500,000 would be on top of the 5.2.
As long as everybody's good with it, we know that now.
Seems like everybody's good.
Wish it didn't have to cost what everything costs.
Everything costs, and we'll see if we can find a way to make it pay itself back as we start getting into implementation. So,
Not sure about OLC and their expertise on the kitchen realm of things as well.
I think your payback is not going to be necessarily, it's nice to think about it in terms of revenue generating components, but you know, I think you put good faith in people to turn this into that kind of signature gateway. And the payback is those photos, the exposure, the way people, the feeling people have when they walk away from this. You know, they spend a lot of time on this PRA plan, and this was reiterated time and time again that, you know, if we're going to do this and kind of create this concentrated experience in this area with some recreation, that's going to speak for itself. That's going to resonate with people. Do that. How it's Give a call to put a number on it? Yeah. Well,
well said. I agree. Thank you. Nothing else? I think we're good. So all three appreciate it and check with the kitchen part. So, yeah.
Yep, thank you very much. Yep.
This afternoon's work session agenda is agenda item number 2, and this is the workforce housing discussion. Don's hiding in the background just in case they need backup. And I think, council, did everybody see that they gave us some paper copies of things? Assume those will be referenced. Tony, can you take a picture of this that they provided to us and text that to Andrew so he has that as well? Because this isn't specifically called out in the packet, so he can see that. Thank you, Cal. Appreciate it. Andrew, there's this bullet pointed list that I think is kind of the order of discussion. I just want to make sure you had that for reference. I think everything else we have is in the packet. Is that correct? These are all the packet. Perfect.
Attachments.
Is that not in front of you, in front of your computer, Melissa?
Okay, that's just for me. Okay, perfect.
Eva, let me know when you'd like the lectern.
Sure. Oh, I think it's just maybe then the order we're tackling them.
Okay.
And I guess with that, Eva, welcome. Thank you. And when you're ready, jump in.
Same. Really excited to be here this evening. As your packet and your materials show, this has been a lot of effort and a lot of work to put together a really comprehensive list for you tonight to have a really great, robust conversation about housing. I think we're going to make some direction with you guys, I hope, and get some clear guidance on where we're headed with this for staff. Staff has researched, like I mentioned, other communities to create a robust, comprehensive strategy tool list to assist with identifying and defining various strategy tools, which will be a foundational concept for us to draft that Frisco strategic plan that we really need to get to. The staff memo encompasses a full list of tools that focus on specific projects and programs which staff believes will have the most impact on Frisco and should be the focus of our efforts. Sorry, the masks are a little hard right now. I have simplified the tools, hopefully for us this evening, and really kind of a checklist that we can try and go through for you, and really 6 slides tonight that sets the framework for a focused housing discussion. We are hopeful, again, like I said, to get clear direction, current affordable housing opportunities, new regulatory strategies, and new funding options. And with that, I'd like to kick it off with the PowerPoint if we're ready for that.
Certainly. Give me one moment, please.
Great, thank you. So like I talked about, we've kind of broken this down into a couple different category buckets. We've got development opportunities and partnerships, policy and regulatory measures. We'll review a little bit about some 5A fund projections, go over some funding and finance with new funding opportunities, and again, come back to that conversation with some of those options with the excise tax and some examples that we've given you in the packet. And Mayor, I wasn't sure how you'd like to proceed. If you want us to, as staff, I could go through sort of a quick summary of each of the items. The checklists are sort of what we have currently in the queue, obviously. And the ones that are unchecked, we have not in the queue that we could certainly spend more time and discussion on, and then have a conversation with council, or I can do one by one, whatever you think would be the best.
Yeah, let's run through all of them really quickly, and then we can come back and kind of tackle them one by one. Just so we
Okay.
get-
So 619 Granite Street is the project that we're currently working through with, in partnership on a joint venture with Colorado Department of Transportation. We just were successfully approved by the Planning Commission on September 2nd for our major site plan application. Really exciting. And so the next steps on that project for the 22 rental unit, again, workforce affordable housing project, that's going to be, we'll be working through the details of the operational agreement with CDOT on sort of who's doing what funding and to get this, try and get this project built. 602 Galena Street is located where the State of Colorado Workforce Center is. This is really preliminary planning stages right now that we're working through, primarily around a House bill that recently passed that's allowing us to use that underutilized building with the state. And so that could potentially lead to some partnerships down the road. Lake Hill is Lake Hill. But certainly working with the county on the next steps with that. And I think we're trying to have a joint meeting maybe down the road with the county commissioners possibly for that project.
Tonight.
Oh, tonight?
Tonight.
Okay, great.
Yeah, good idea. Let's bring.
I
these
was
guys
looking
in
forward to
tonight.
staying with you guys a little bit longer tonight. Perfect. So let's great. So we can jump into other opportunities. 275 Granite Street is also known as the Sabatini lot. I think earlier this year, we had originally talked about maybe doing an RFP for some potential development there. We kind of held on to that for a little bit. We've tried to work maybe through some conversations with the private developer that's next door. So we're still hanging on to that lot. And certainly would open that up for conversations with council once we go through the rest of the list. First and Main building as well, along with the 113 Granite Street, puts us sort of in the conversation around the historic park. I provided a more blown up map for that for you for that conversation, as well as the Peak One School that we can dive into. Bill, did you have anything maybe on those I should bring up?
Not at this point.
Okay.
Awesome. Conversationally, is there any specific questions you guys have before I have one I know to kick off, but looking at
I might sit
the
down.
on the page with the 113 Granite and the one main building or 100 excuse me. I know that alleyway right away is our right away, but there's a ton of infrastructure in there. Like is it possible to utilize that for building space with all that infrastructure? Just be really expensive. We'd have to move it all, or how does that look? Because I know it's kind of called out as useful on that, or is that just kind of including just for awareness sake that
Which piece?
on the 113 Granite, the alley between First and Main and 113
Yeah,
Granite?
the alley's got some development potential in that it's a good location. It's an unused property at this point. The big encumbrance with that is utilities. I believe there's water sewer mains in there along with electric and gas. Some of the past conversations that were discussed with the 113 property specifically, if that were to be developed rather than become an extension of the park, is you would have the opportunity to double load access wise for 113. So you could access off Granite directly, but then you could also have an access creating like a driveway or something down that alley to access it from the back. So that's one development possibility. But I think because of those existing utilities, unless there was a lot of investment made in relocating those, it might be a good piece of property for park expansion or something to that effect. Again, with buildings being difficult because of the utilities without paying some significant expenses to relocate them.
Yep. I just want to double check that. See, the way it was just called out, I just want to make sure I wasn't.
Yeah,
That was my
since we're
assumption.
talking about First and Main and 113 anyway, we might as well connect the dots and include the alley in the discussion.
Has there been conversation in the historic park museum staff about expanding the park into that space?
I defer a little bit to Diane, but I think there's been a conversation off and on over the years. I think there's been desires, especially from the historic park staff, to have expansion opportunities, whether that be offices or storage or a new type of use that's not currently there for the historic park, or even opportunities to, shift buildings around, add new buildings. there's a lot of opportunity with that First and Main project. And I, correct me if I'm wrong, Diane, I think there's so many opportunities that's part of why the working group a couple years back kind of came to an end without a decision. In part because we don't own the building yet, but that's a decision for council. If you do decide to complete the purchase of that, then you've got a lot of options on the table.
So just a couple. Is kind of these opportunities.
We're
Are we gonna come
flexible.
back, or
I
is
think we can here, but we certainly, yeah.
So on CDOT projects, unfortunately, I'm not gonna be at the budget session on Monday. So I'll just chime in now. For me, it's obviously a project of great importance. I don't necessarily think we should spend $5 million of our cash on that. And so while I'm thrilled with the final design, I think it's a significant project. I want to think creatively and look to experts, developers to help us understand how it can be financed, what other government funds can be leveraged, so that we don't drain our 5A fund for a project that we have not all control. I mean, we're a partner in it, but it's not our development. So that doesn't. I'll put it in the positive. I'd like us to find alternative revenue sources. Certainly willing to contribute some, but not 90% of our 5A fund for that. On the other, obviously we'll get to Lake Hill later. On the other lots, Granite, First and Main, 113. Full transparency, I was on the development team that took a comprehensive look at those properties. But those properties individually are so constrained because of parking. If we don't look collectively at
Melissa, I can't hear you. And neither can Thad.
Can you hear me now?
Give it another word.
Hello?
It's very muted.
We're wearing masks.
She's quiet.
No, way more than mask, way more than mask muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Should I start over? I don't want to start over, but I'm really focused on, in a nutshell, Andrew, I don't want to see 5 million of our funds drained into one project. I want us to think and look creatively for alternative ways to finance and fund the CDOT project. So that's my first one. And on kind of the second column, if you will, the quote unquote other opportunities, I just gave a caveat at the beginning that for many years I was part of a development team and we looked comprehensively at all of these properties together along with the neighbor there. And I think I can speak freely, having no conflict of interest at this point. If we don't do that, it is such a missed opportunity because the small lots are so constrained by parking. You can fit double that, if not triple, if you find an alternative to the parking code. Not to say they won't be parked, but if there's another way to slice the parking, whether it's a parking garage somewhere, whether it's offsite parking somewhere, a reduced parking code, they're so tiny. But like on 113, I would encourage us as a council, the traditional viewpoint on that itty bitty teeny weeny piece of land is, oh, you could barely fit 4 units there. Well, actually you could fit like 30 micro condos there. I mean, that's like, I don't think you want 30 micro condos, but there's a different way of looking at it. And so when we look at these properties, we need to think comprehensively. We should not think about them in an isolated nature. And so the housing working group document that was done 5 or 6 years ago looks at each one individually, and we need to think about them together so that we can park them all at once. We can fund them all at once. they're part of a portfolio that can work together to get the most bang for our buck. So hopefully,
Oh, no. Fine, we're here.
No, I just needed somebody else.
Thanks, Melissa. Melissa, I totally agree on the CDOT project and whatever we can, I think I feel good knowing we have money budgeted for it so we can get the project started or at least make it happen, but anything we can do to find somebody else to pay for it, run it, fund it, finance it, I think that'd be the best use we can do with that lot and that money for sure. I'm fully agree.
But I would, excuse me, I would not want to. I mean, that's got some momentum and that's going.
Yeah, I don't want to stall.
Yeah,
That's
no,
something-
definitely.
Yeah,
Or something we could turn over to somebody, recoup the money.
if there's a way, but, you know, we've been looking at that 5A money for a lot of years and this lot, you know, and making that connection for a long time. You know, I think some of that will be informed, we can get a little bit more information maybe later when we talk about resetting the sunset on the 5A fund. Yeah, I agree, it'd be great if, but I'd like to continue to move forward with, you know, with the cash in the pocket, just to make sure that the commitment all around is solid, so that people know that we're committed to the project regardless. And I think that's really important. So
Which is part of the reason we've been hanging on to that 5A, some of that 5A fund and building it up as for this project. So
But I agree with that, in terms of opportunities and parking and workforce overlay districts, I think we've got to break out of the existing paradigm and we've got to build for a new customer without cars, a customer who's used to plugging into a whole different kind of a mobility paradigm. And that has to come in concert with all these developments for that reason. I agree. I was hoping that was going to be part of Granite Street. As we looked at that Granite Street streets plan, it would wrap around the 100. First and Main, it might have worked out, but it's a big red herring. We need to get rid of that. We need to sell it and have somebody develop that property. It's crazy that we're sitting on it. And 113 needs a nice focused workforce housing. So, and I think it could all happen with the right players. But again, we have to be committed, I think, and ready to move it as fast as we can ahead. And that is to the Sabatini lot. And that to me is right for sale. And I think that needs to go out, see what we get for it. And I think we could bring that to some other smaller development projects that we could do, I think, currently, or at least to Melissa's point, from a planning perspective, I think something that really makes sense. But I don't think we need to feel like we need to develop all of these. I think we want to hang on to make sure we control the development on 113 because it's very sensitive. I think First and Main is a prime commercial lot. And I think we can extract some great housing out of that without us having to do anything except sell it for the right price. But those are kind of initially where I'm at. I don't know what direction we're going to go on 602 Galena, but I think it's a fantastic opportunity. And again, not let parking necessarily constrain density. We've got to think forward in terms of parking.
I don't know if I can jump in.
Yeah, please, Andrew, go ahead.
I agree with most everything. You know, we should be building workforce housing where it should be built. But I look at it that we've got the CDOT lot, 22 plus or 22 units, the workforce lot somewhere in 30, Lake Hill 460, Sabatini 50, 2 active developers own the other half of Sabatini with Glassman, and the other active developer, you got Feldman at the end of Granite. There's a lot going on. And I don't like I guess I go back to no town has ever said we have too much park space in our core downtown area. And if you look at our historic park, all of a sudden it's going to be surrounded by more development, more people, more kids. Put the Peak School into play with it as kind of a question mark. And the thought of giving up what could be an expanded, better park for the community that lives here now and will live here later. I just don't see the need with the development opportunities that we have to start selling off what could otherwise be an expanded, dynamic, attractive park. So, on all of that, I think to add also, we've got a lot of rental units that there's no reason we own either. So in the world of disposing of Sabatini lot, I don't see a reason we can't or shouldn't deed restrict a lot of the rental units we've got. So we still control the use, but put the money back in our pockets to reinvest in the projects that we're doing. So I don't know. My biggest thing is I just think historic park right now is nice, but we can make it great before we just sort of start selling off parcels because we're addicted to building our way out of this problem. And I think we need to maintain our community a little better than that. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, sure.
You don't have to.
That's my career. A few things. I would like to actually hear like Eva's rendition of the list, and what you think, how you think we should be spending our time and priority and money and whatnot. Just in your opinion, because this is your expertise, right? Yeah, CDOT is a done deal, and I think everything we're looking at for big money projects is we're changing our view of how we fund these things. So it's not going to be coming from the general fund. We'll figure it out, right? That's what I would hope to say on that. 602 Galena is a brilliant potential. If it's that we buy the property and we get a developer or that sort of thing, and or if it turns and we just deed restrict them, I don't know. We should figure these things out, which, what's in our wheelhouse and what's not. I'm in agreement with Andrew on that. Lake Hill, we want to move forward with, I believe, but I think there's a lot of unanswered questions at this point. That's a huge separate conversation. Sabatini lot, 275 Granite. I think potentially could be prime personally for selling in order for a developer to just really do the right thing there. And then we could use some of that, to enhance the park and potentially develop, some affordable micro units. I'm in agreement in that what Bill was saying with the alleyway, that should just be park, right? I mean, easy enough to sod over it. Maybe we put the little cabin that we just bought, from Bill's Ranch somewhere over there, right? That's not on top of utilities. The whole of 113, we saw the 30 units come along with the other plan that was put in front of us for Sabatini lot. And yeah, we have to offset all of that with an underground parking, which was going to be all of Sabatini and the other in the next door. So, what do we need to do creatively for parking? We obviously have to follow along with what everyone else has to do and what the law is. But if we were to develop 12 units, or we were to put out that we wanted something like that, even 20 units, does it all need to be built on site underneath? And this is all just cost into what, into building at $400 a square foot. So I think there's lots of potential with the 113 that way, even though it's small. I think there's lots of potential with First and Main building.
don't think we should sell that, but I think whatever we built there could incorporate park elements and whatnot, and, give us an actual, we're talking a lot about housing. We also have to consider the need for commercial to go along with it, because as we're bringing more people into all these things, we have less childcare, we have less dentists, and, as our restaurants are experiencing 22% or more growth per year, and if that's going to keep going for who knows how long, then they're not going to be able to support what that is, and we need other infrastructure along with, right? So I believe all of these being close to the core should be mixed use in some fashion, and there should be a good representation, especially of affordable commercial as well, if we have the possibility to go along with it. I think, I don't know exactly how to attack that First and Main building, but it might just be a scraper and, a whole new deal going on there. Hopefully, theoretically, we would have the footrest as part of the historic park eventually. Just to expand our park options and be part of that, right? I think that's probably from where Peak One School is other opportunities on this list. I don't think we should be buying that building personally. If the only way to potentially deed restrict it or lay something on it is we buy it and we turn it for what it's worth, then maybe. But I'm also getting a lot of public backlash from potentially doing this project at the PRA. So just to put out there, as this is part of the discussion, there are a lot of unhappy constituents out there about the possibility of giving up our public land. I think that's the list for me. Sorry if I went on.
I jump in where you left off. I think we can just scratch the Peak schools, the Peak schools. It's not for sale. We don't have any, we have no deal. We have no agreement with them. We don't know what the future holds with that whole conversation. It's simply a conversation right now and nothing more. And even I think we just don't go there until we know more and we have clear direction back. So for that for me is a simple one. The Galena has been something I've been working on really hard for a long time. And with the help of the county, it was great. We did get that meeting. So that was a phenomenal and exciting start to that process. So I think that's with huge potential. I think before that became closer to a reality, as Eva said, it's still very in its infancy, but it seems like a reality. I was always very, I think as most of you know, leery of selling 275 Granite, but I'm more comfortable with that. Hearing what we've heard, seeing what we've seen, and knowing we have something that's probably a better lot and a better use for housing. So I think I can come around to the idea of selling the Sabatini lot for the benefits that we could get out of it, especially knowing we potentially have what I think we can get a lot more out of just down the road for what we want to accomplish. So I definitely have a growing comfort level there. I think a question I'll circle around to back for council, but on the Granite Street, 275 Granite is, if we do sell it, obviously it's not something we need to decide right now, but like what kind of restrictions would we be looking at as part of that deal? Go ahead, Melissa. Yeah.
I was just gonna ask that question. Can you deed restrict a lot? I mean, can you
We can encumber it.
encumber the lot with a housing?
You're a property
Encumbrance?
owner and you can put whatever encumbrances you want it, just like any other property owner can.
Yeah, I've just never seen
Yes.
that. That would be really interesting.
It would require some creative drafting in terms of this is the covenant that will be one day if a residence was built, but sure. Yes, the answer is yes.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's good enough for now, but if we're all, hopefully we're not saying like just sell with no ask for housing on it. Is that what you're thinking?
Right, no, we should absolutely be applying the ask, including, whatever, whatever environmentally friendly additions it should all have as well, to go along with our code.
As long as we all understand that, no, coming from above, as long as we all understand that every restriction diminishes the value. So you look at the lot is worth, let's just say market value, $2 million. Every time you put workforce or some other qualifier on what a developer can do with it, you're restricting the amount of money that's then going into the 5A fund. Sounds obvious, but need to put that on the table.
But I think in conjunction with the possibility of the parcel next to it increases then the value, then it's sitting as an individual parcel. So I think there's a.
Oh, I agree with selling it, and I think it's great, but I just want to make sure it's not going to sell, you know, if we say it has to be all workforce housing, it may not be worth, it may be worth zero.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say that either.
No, knowing that.
That's so rigid, but I mean, what bothers me about the idea of selling it is that is a huge, I mean, it is such a you know, opportunity, and it's downtown, and I cringe at the thought of it all being market homes. I really, really do. And you know, obviously the property owner to the west has the ability to develop as he wishes with density bonus for affordable housing, which is great. And collectively, the two sites can really work together if we encourage the right kind of development through whatever we encumber it with, if we were to sell it. So that's what I would be getting at, because the opportunity cannot be realized with without at least two developers working together. We need to get out of the way, but we need to guide what wants to be there, is how I'd say it.
So I don't disagree, and I think our code, the way it's written right now, creates, you know, that opportunity, that potential, you know, for developers. So I think there's some lots where I'm more willing to get well out of the way. And Sabatini to me is one of those that's prime for a certain kind of development by a certain kind of developer. And to Andrew's point, this is, I think, always been in my mind implicit, is that, yeah, you know, what we sell it for, we're going to try and get what we want to extract out of it at the same time. So, but it gives us an opportunity to be more focused with a very specific kind of development that we might want on other lots that need to be underwritten a little bit more. And 113 is such a lot. But First and Main too falls into that category, because I think there's the same kind of ask we can have when the task force looked at that back in 17. You know, in an hour, we had 5 developers that sketched out design plans for the First and Main building that had commercial on the downstairs, and they had 2 floors of you know, affordable workforce housing upstairs. So, you know, and again, it's in that commercial core. It's one of those areas where I think it behooves us to kind of get out of the way when developers come in, and we kind of just structure our deal based on what we want to extract out of it that's reasonable. And I don't think we have to over ask. And the last part of that kind of goes to the reality of Lake Hill, because I've said for years that the reality of Lake Hill is going to inform all these conversations. Because if you're looking at, you know, 5 different typologies on Lake Hill and, you know, 400 units, it allows us quite a bit more bandwidth in terms of talking about what kind of units we want developed in the core. So, and I think that's really important. I think all of these lots right down there, and I carve 113 out because I think it's a very space sensitive development, and I don't think we need to look at density there. I think we need to look at a more hybrid kind of historic development where maybe we bring, you know, the old cabin that we found. Maybe we can look at that to still as a lodging space, but not in one particular spot that's the density driven discussion. That really isn't, you know, maybe there's still space there for an artisan shop and, you know, 3 units, and it really is, it's incorporated into the historic park and it represents it, but at the same time, this does not have to be this dropped in place density driven development. Because you're going to have an opportunity to do that, hopefully, First and Main, and at 275, and at 602, and at, so Lake Hill. So
Can I interject something just real quick on that is, so you all know I'm a big proponent for the arts, and in all of the discussions that I've had over the years with various people concerning 113, where we landed on the park was that expanding the park into that area was a bit awkward, and the park's energy is where it needs to be. It's kind of weird to have like an offshoot, but there could be an opportunity for maybe some sort of like artist studio, artist in residence, something like that that plays off of the historic park. But I do not support expanding the park. I mean, we have the park and it has a beautiful perimeter. We don't need more sort of like empty historic buildings, but if there's a way to complement it like that and weave in the arts and artist studio, diversify the historic park a bit, I think that'd be super cool. And I think to Dan's idea, some kind of housing, lightly touched would be cool.
Sure. If I can. Huge proponent for the arts myself, but a big thing is that, I had one of the historic buildings as my workshop for about 6 years before it all went to museum. And there were artists in multiple buildings there. And it's an incredible opportunity for just, for people visiting, for locals to be able to start their own business as a revenue generator because they're paying rent for those buildings instead of them just sitting empty. I am all about, turning it all back over into an artist collective if that's what, the direction that we're talking about. Different thing, not necessarily housing. Partially, though, it is supporting the commercial effort that we'll need to support all of these extra people, and be able to be creative and have creative spaces and whatnot. So I'm big on that too. I'd like to hear from Eva if we can.
Yeah.
Or, oh, you did.
No, I wanted to flesh that out because I've been thinking about that spot and that utilization for quite a while. And that's why, frankly, I voted to preserve that cavern because in my mind, 113 is an opportunity to kind of bring some of that together and start to create that space, that synergy of some residents. And that 113 was always tough. And even back in 17, when the housing task force looked at it, we really talked about how that transitions in the park and how as residents as they can transition to the park in your backyard. It really needed to retain that element. And that was going to be the difficult design. We got pieces in place. And again, that does not have to be, we don't solve the housing problem on 113, but I think we can use that space to create this really interesting, vibrant, kind of this very interesting living space. And even if it's 4 units or 5 units and being a small cabins, the people, fine, it's great. We can bring the Excelsior House over, and maybe that's a spot for it still, so not free, it's going to be expensive, but I think it could be part of that phased in the long term. Once you decide that's the way it's going to go, that's the kind of thing we can look at here.
I'll give one more of my piece because I left one building out very specifically, and then kind of turn it over, and then we'll keep the conversation going because there's lots of more good information in the packet. But hopefully this has been helpful, and I've seen you guys taking lots of notes, so I assume that's a good sign. But for me, on a personal level, the first in Maine will be one that I will fight hard until I completely lose consensus on. But being on that original group that helped convince council to acquire the property, and the committee that Bill referenced had a really good head of steam until it completely disappeared. And a little bit to what Andrew referenced earlier, I think that truly is where most people see Main Street starting, and I think will be that way for a very long time. Like the way it's laid out, and to have anything commercial or housing there would be a wasted opportunity when we could have the premier green space park on the nation's most beautiful Main Street in the middle of the mountains. When we have something like Hill, which I do now believe is feasible, and we can have get done. And if we sell that and it's commercial, the nature and the feel and the character of that park is forever changed. Because they're gonna maximize height, they're gonna maximize use, even if we ask for housing. And it won't be the same, and it's gonna cast a shadow literally over that park that I don't feel comfortable with, and I don't think, and obviously, original intents of council change every 2 years, so we don't have to honor what that committee said or why we initially, went after that property. But for me, this is an opportunity, especially looking at what else is on here, potential development and size, that is a small postage stamp corner that will dictate the character and community of this town for years to come. And risking that, to me, is sacrosanct. I don't think it's worth it personally, when we have other opportunities for what we can. So that's my.
So help me understand what is the utilization level? Because that's always bothered me. I didn't understand why it was bought, and it's languished there, and it's an expensive, right now, it's a very expensive thing to hang on to with no clear mission. And so what is that? Do you see it, how do you see it being incorporated into the park from utilization standpoint? And then how, or do you see any housing component to scale down, or how do you see the use?
And unfortunately, I really wish, and I looked through my old computer, I can't find one of the draft plans we had before we kind of sidetracked that committee. And it became kind of a housing conversation. The committee itself really looked at, yes, I agree, it's completely underutilized, and it's an expensive underutilized cinder block. But the committee looked at scraping it, expanding the park with creating some sort of like outdoor meeting space, then truly stage area on that far west end, and expanding that green space, and potentially 1 or 2 additional historic structures, but not anything large, nothing that's gonna, like overwhelm that space, and just expand the park area. So the gazebo is still kind of the center, with then like an outdoor area that we could use for concerts, for weddings, for speaker series, for picnics, when nobody else is using it, and just kind of that, maybe a roof line, maybe not, but kind of an expanded area, and make that park truly from one end to the other green space with some more activation throughout, was where we were headed. So
Number one, could we encumber the property to reflect those values so that it did? I mean, I don't disagree with what you're saying. I don't know that it needs to be green. But the other thing, and I was really inspired by the presentation that I was a part of last week with Brett Create. And I just see an opportunity for us to do something not identical to Brett Create, but something that incorporates all of these elements that we're learning are becoming so sacred to our town. They always have been, but now we really need to be deliberate about where we place them and where we focus them. And so, could there be a small building there that serves a complementary purpose to the historic park? Historic park takes front and center. And, I think that's a really valid concern, that our park would be shaded. I mean, that's huge, and I think we should sort of memorialize that somehow with whatever happens there in the future, things like that. But I mean, this whole discussion, we're way in the weeds, but at the same time, like, we have had a lot of discussions about housing, and I really look to you guys to take these ideas and in the near future say, okay, this is what I heard. These are the projects that are going to get us there. Because I think, and that's, what we hope for out of our new town manager, and we need to take it from idea and talk to real projects. And so I think, I don't know, that's just,
I don't think we're necessarily in the weeds. I think this is good, because now,
Yeah.
for me, I feel like almost on a consensus level, we have some stuff where we can be like, all right, let's start getting after it.
Yeah.
And this is my segue over to you guys. I definitely heard every one of us mention, and I know it's already referenced in coming pages in the staff report, but parking and how we address that for workforce housing and what some opportunities are there. So
Hunter, can I, excuse me.
yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead and finish your thought.
We'll throw it back to you, but go ahead, Andrew.
Before I sensed you were ready to move on, I just want to hopefully, my understanding or where I'm at is CDOT full bore ahead, the workforce building, you know, go for it. It's the ideal site. It's an ideal opportunity. Lake Hill, we're going to talk about soon. Sabatini, we're seemingly ready to move, that it's the right place and the right size, or that's the right spot for a project. So full strength ahead to do something there. I'm not sure what, but I'm sensing in my preference, I will claim my opinion is when it comes to historic park, we got some thinking and some talking to do before we give the direction of full steam ahead. So we've got a lot of things we're moving forward on, you know, and I love the fact that the workforce project actually is coming onto the board, and that can get us even to a better place than we would have been had we just been talking about the properties adjoining historic park. And as my last thought there is, because I just looked at the map to double check my thinking was right. If you're standing on Granite looking at 113, you basically have the historic park to your right, and you have classic Frisco Granite Street development to your left. And I would sure as heck hope that whatever happens to 113 looks a lot more like the right than the left. So I think that I'm leery to move on to the other topics before we've given clear direction of where we are.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. Go ahead, Andy.
And then also just Eva as well, if we're needing funding and all, we should be looking at all these other extraneous units that we have, like Mountainside and whatnot, you know, let's sell them if it's time to sell them. Or, you know, let's rent them if we need to rent them. Let's, you know, we're sitting on some stuff that way too, that we should be able to like move.
Well, we need rentals.
Yeah.
But, you know, I certainly think that the conversation has been really helpful on this topic. As you guys have found with the staff report as well in these dialogues, we all start to get interconnected with where we're headed with this. So I think we want to head into policy and regulatory measures.
Are we not going to be able to hear what your opinions are?
Yeah, I think for me personally, I think that, you know, like, I think we see their opinion because these are the projects they know we have access to and they're excited about.
Yeah, I mean, I put my opinion into the staff report, for sure, for sure. I spent a lot of time on the staff report. I think for sure that I'm excited about the CDOT project and that finally coming to fruition. I can't wait to see something there, livability, walkability, rentals on that project. CDOT is incredibly excited about that for their staff as well. And I think we'll come to a good agreement where we're not putting all of our funds into that project. I'm fighting hard for grant money, hopefully here soon when I have some time off my plate to be able to do some of those things as the SDR specialist has started this week. So I'm hoping to see some light at the end of the tunnel with that for myself, as well as the workforce center. You know, that's been really a collaborative process so far and more to come on that. Sabatini, I think for sure is ripe for selling, but I would love to see strings attached to that to make sure that there's housing and workforce housing on that property. I wouldn't want to just sell it either. And the historic park and the 113 in the alley was all learning for me. I did not know all the history behind that. This was a really good exercise for me to get up to speed with that property. And I've certainly read through the Frisco Housing Task Report, so I can kind of see the charrettes and what could or couldn't go in different places. So those are some of my thoughts.
Thank you.
Is this your turn, Bill?
It is.
All right.
It is. So first off, I do want to compliment Eva and Soleil for the bulk of the work on this. I'm in the supportive role here. So some of these regulatory things fall a lot in the zoning world. So that's why I'm here to kind of help out with this section. Like the slide before, we've got 13 items on here. Any one of these could be a 2+ hour work session. So just acknowledging that on the front end. So we're just looking again, similar to what you guys just did on the last slide, some general direction of things you guys as a group want us to start pursuing, and we can bring those to you again at a future date in more detail and potential ordinances and all those things. So as noted on your slide here, we do have quite a few things that we are already doing, so I do want to acknowledge that. We are doing density bonus. We do allow accessory dwelling units. We have land banking. We have housing assistance programs. We have short-term rental regulations, and we have small lot development. With all of those, there's opportunities to change what we're doing to better incentivize housing. And so the first one on the list, density bonus. That's how we have a lot of the deed restriction units we have today is through density bonus. You see that mostly in the core areas where we allow that under today's code. So some of Larry Feldman's projects are where we're getting some of those town center condos off Main, projects like that. There are opportunities to expand that to the other part of town. We did note some of the challenges with that in the staff report. I think an underlying issue that you need to be aware of in terms of creating incentives with our zoning code is our zoning code's already liberal in terms of density. And I think in certain neighborhoods, there's already pushback on what is already happening out there. So it's something to be cognizant of. It's hard to create incentives when a single family can get torn down and become a fourplex by right today. There's not a lot of incentive for people to do accessory units and deed restrictions and things like that. So I just want to kind of paint that broad picture for you. But there certainly are some opportunities for density bonus. So we'd like to hear your thoughts and opinions on expanding that maybe to some of the higher density residential districts, or even the lower density ones, but putting caps on those and limits on those. Because today, there are no caps or limits on our density bonus. It's simply being regulated de facto by meeting parking, by meeting building height, by meeting setbacks, and whatever the market demand is for unit size is what's constraining the density bonus today. It's indirect rather than direct. In terms of accessory dwelling units, we've allowed those for quite a few number of years. I'm only aware of maybe 2 or 3 that are actually deed restricted. You can do accessory units today by right. They simply count as density. So the incentive to create a deed restricted accessory dwelling units is only in those situations where properties exceed their underlying density. We've heard feedback that, people are allowed to do lock-offs in Frisco as well. Our code allows that. And the only real distinction is a kitchen versus not a kitchen. So if you have a wet bar with a hot plate and a microwave, you're 90% to a living situation, accommodation, but it's technically not an accessory dwelling unit. And those lock-offs don't come with building code requirements for fire separation walls. It doesn't come with separate tap fees. It doesn't come with limitations on short-term rental and limitations on rental rates and those types of things. So most folks that we've talked to, or at least I've talked to over the years, just do a lock-off at the end of the day. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because that does provide quite a bit of workforce housing at the end of the day. Little sharing of a bedroom or a basement space, things like that, that has organically developed over the years. But if you're truly looking for deed restricted housing, this tool is not getting us there in its current form today. We mentioned land banking. That's a conversation you actually just had. And part of the challenge with doing that in the future is obviously there's limited land available and the prices are quite high. So that creates some inherent challenges. We've talked about some housing assistance programs in the past. That's the Housing Helps 2.0. That's some of the things we're doing internally, like with employee down payment assistance, things like that. There's always opportunities to expand those programs. The big one out there today is short-term rentals. I think you're seeing a lot of community conversation with the county level and Breckenridge and some of our other, similarly situated communities about, are there additional constraints you want to explore with that, whether it's capping those numbers at percentages or sheer numbers, or limiting them to certain geographic areas, certain zone districts. There's a lot of different opportunities to change what we do today in terms of short-term regulations. Small lot development is on this list as well. We do that to an extent in the Peak One neighborhood. Those are smaller lots than you traditionally find in other places in Frisco. There are towns and communities that have adopted small lot development regulations. I think something unique about Frisco is that we may already be doing that de facto. So some of these properties that you're seeing redeveloped, where it may have been a single family or an old duplex, it becomes a fourplex. With redevelopment, they're actually creating standalone townhomes on that lot. So from a functionality perspective, people are gaining a single family like living experience, but from a technical land ownership, mortgage, those types of technicalities, they're technically townhomes and you're part of a homeowners association, but you are getting potentially 3, 4, or 5 freestanding buildings, which is almost like a small lot development concept. So we're not getting there formally, but we're getting there informally through our current regulations. But again, that's certainly something that can be adjusted. Now we have a whole entire list of opportunities where you see things happening in other communities that we're not pursuing to the same degree here in Frisco. Eva highlighted some things in the staff report about incentives for short-term rentals to long-term rentals. Some of those are pilot programs, but it involves financial compensation to people to incentivize those. Another one on here is inclusionary zoning. You can see this on a macro scale down in the Denver and the suburbs and places like that, where if somebody's building hundreds of units, a certain percentage or a certain number of those homes or apartments or townhomes will be limited in size and sale price. And that's essentially inclusionary zoning. You see it more at a micro level in some of our neighboring ski towns, where they may take that to the next degree, where it could get down to even on a single family development, you could have a inclusionary zoning requirement. You're obviously not creating a physical unit, but you may have a pay in lieu type requirement, or something to require some off-site mitigation, those types of things. Those regulations are much more complicated and a bit legally more challenging to accommodate, but they are opportunities. Some communities are creating standards for tiny homes. We're seeing, some communities look at RV parks as opportunities for housing, things like that. Our code does not have any tiny home regulations, and we don't allow people to formally live in their RVs unless it's in a formal campground, of which there are none in Frisco. Our code does have some language in there about mobile home parks and some pretty strict encumbrances on those that you typically don't find in other places. So those are some opportunities to change our regulations if we want to allow some of those types of things here in Frisco as one option. Commercial linkages on this list, that's essentially the same thing as inclusionary zoning, except on the commercial side. So when a new business is constructed, new commercial floor area is constructed, developers typically have the opportunity to incorporate housing into their project as a mixed use type of opportunity, or go out and deed restrict things off-site, or a fee in lieu opportunity as well. Again, commercial linkage and inclusionary zoning, we do have, if we were to go down those paths, there's some legal homework we have to do. We'd have to get some consultants on board, figure out some nexus studies, figure out just how much of an impact businesses or future residential create to set up that program. So it's not something that can happen overnight, but it is a possibility. In Frisco, though, we're not seeing a huge amount of commercial development, compared to a suburb of Denver or some other places where you've had millions of dollars worth of property being developed. We have some here, but again, much different scale than some other communities. Something that's been kind of tossed around over the years is a workforce housing overlay district. The idea being we have a historic overlay district today that if you encumber your property with a deed restriction to maintain a historic building or historic property into the future, you're allowed some deviations from the underlying zoning requirements, whether that's setbacks or parking or landscaping or design elements. So the thought is we could use that for workforce housing as well. We could set some kind of a threshold. The CDOT property could have been a prime example of something like this. That's a 100% workforce housing project that's not happening in the marketplace otherwise. So an incentive to that could be to create some leniency in the development standards. So that's a opportunity as well. Another item on the list is the adaptive reuse of hotels. You've seen that at the Alpine Inn with Summit County coordinating that effort today. There's some other hotels here in Frisco that if you chose to, you could pursue conversations with those owners and see if they'd be open to some type of arrangement with that as well. It creates workforce housing, but on the other side of the coin, it's reducing lodging units and lodging tax revenues, those types of things. But it is an opportunity for workforce housing. And we know you've had some conversations about parking in the past and looking at some different creative opportunities. It does add expense and limit density on projects creating parking, but it also needs to be balanced with creating livability for folks as well. We need to be cognizant that not every family can work remotely, and people do need to travel for their jobs and things like that too. So it's finding that balance of reducing costs, creating opportunity, yet preserving livability, especially when it's folks that are living here full time, and that's the intent of the workforce housing. So that's the laundry list on this slide for you guys.
Greatly appreciated. And I think the easy one's where you left off, because you did say that, we've had conversations on parking in the last. Like, I think that's where, I think Dan put it best. Like, I think there's a paradigm shift of how people are moving around, especially the local workforce. I think that to me would be I would put that one pretty high up on my list, at least, to look at. Quicker fix, especially in light of our last conversation, where that's the restrictive part of gaining more of what we need, which is workforce units, especially those rentals. If we can tie those two conversations together as we move forward, I think we can get a lot more out of the properties we do have or that we're exploring. So another question, did you leave transferable development rights off of this list intentionally? Is it just not something that you see as much of a benefit, or where does that fall in this?
Left off the slide intentionally, but it's not something we've historically participated in with Summit County or the other jurisdictions. My understanding is that program was more set up as an open space goal than it was a workforce housing goal. So you're taking development rights off some of the mining claims and things like that and pushing it more into the towns and the communities that are developed. We could certainly entertain that.
I've just doing in offhand things of some things that are happening with two like different construction projects within Brett, but I'm just not sure what they're doing. So it's an area that I don't have much, but no, I actually zero knowledge about. So I just thought it would be worth
Generally
asking.
speaking.
Oh, I see, Don. You got your backup coming to the microphone.
I do have a little bit of familiarity with the TDR program from when I was at Summit County, and workforce housing is actually exempt from TDRs when it's being developed, except in the Upper Blue Basin, and there they do a half a unit offset for it, or 2-to-1 offset. So it's not a great tool for workforce housing, as Bill noted earlier. Frisco is very liberal already in its density allowances, so there's not a lot of incentive to bring in and go buy a $40,000 mining claim in order to get that density. There's just not a market for it. And also in the 10-mile basin, which is where Frisco is located, there's not a lot of TDRs really available in the basin. Most of the TDR program success in Summit County has been in the Upper Blue Basin and Breckenridge. It's certainly not a tool that's really worth from the housing perspective.
It's that easy. Thank you. Since I'm up and running, I'll just keep going. For me, I'd also, and I know with the caveat that you mentioned, Bill, with the amount of work that does need to go in, but I think the inclusionary zoning is a place I'd really like to see. We have good discussions around and how we can utilize some of that, because I think there's huge opportunity there, in my opinion, for benefiting the direction we're in, some of the goals we're trying to meet. As a side note from the CAST meeting 2 weeks ago that a few of us attended, Crested Butte and maybe Uray both did in their emergency ordinance around housing, allowed RVs to be parked on any lot in town where the owner of that property agreed to it. And I think between the two towns, I think that one person take advantage of it, which was really surprising, knowing those areas and what they're going through, that just wasn't a big incentive. And so they both said it was an experiment and it didn't really go anywhere. So I was surprised by that. So just as an informative thing. And then the cabin zoning is another thing that I've looked at personally for our lot, because I think I have potential where I live to do something like that. But I think it's a good idea. And I know, Andy, you championed a lot of it and brought it here. I think it needs a little updating in some of its intent and livability. And I think that's something that we could look at to make more useful for what I think its intent was, based on kind of the conversations we're having. It's just a little restrictive in certain size and percentage of buildings and other things. Those are areas that I thought I had another note in here, but yeah, I think for me right now, the ones I would see the most the most beneficial personally as on this list, other like the short-term rental things, I think we'll continue discussing as we go, but the parking requirements on the short term and that inclusionary zoning and maybe commercial linkage tied together to really kind of lever some good motion forward.
Okay, so I kind of just going down the list. One thing that I see missing that I know we've just sort of batted around, maybe casually, maybe informally, is really disincentivizing what we see throughout town of taking a traditionally middle income unit or home and scraping it to build multiple multi-million dollar vacation homes. And it's absolutely what happens on every single lot that is redeveloped right now. And we 100% are in the driver's seat on that with our zoning code, with our fees. And you talk about an overlay zone. I think our whole town is an overlay zone. If you're going to bring workforce housing in a development like that, incentivize it and de-incentivize the construction of these $2, $3, $5 million townhomes that keep going up one up. They're beautiful. They're beautifully built. They look great, but they're hollowing out our town. On the STRs, I actually just coincidentally met somebody from Salida who told me quite a bit about their STR regulations. I'd encourage you to look at those. They have a cap. They have a per block cap, which may be something we should look into by neighborhood or area of town, something like that. For example, Peak One neighborhood, we can have no STRs. Obviously, we're deed restricted, but if you want locals housing, you cannot have STRs in the neighborhood. Or you at least have to put some kind of reasonable limit on them. Incentivize long-term rentals. Some of those ideas, I think there were some out of maybe Grand County where the town was actually somehow monetizing that the difference between the short-term and the long-term to get people. And it's kind of in our housing helps, but really marketed towards, hey, you've got a vacation rental. We'll pay you to put it in our long-term rental. And if you want to come up here on vacation, we'll pay to put you in another short-term rental. Because a lot of people, maybe they spend a few weeks, but you all get the idea. That I think that's a really promising idea. Start paying tap fees, development fees as part of that townwide overlay zone. If you're going to bring us a workforce housing development, we'll pay your tap fees, we'll pay your development fees, just like we did in Peak One and other neighborhoods. We've really got to really encourage it if we want to get people doing it. Let's see. Another idea that I heard that also came out of Crested Butte is that they have reallocated the money that they used to, and I'm really generalizing on this, the money that they used to spend on advertising for visitation, they now use for housing. And so it could be used to market programs like Housing Helps, market whatever program we come up with on long-term rentals. So instead of just encouraging more visitation, because I think we're good on that, and we need to hold it stable, but we need to advertise we need to funnel it back into housing somehow. Another one that came up, this was Lowly's idea that I thought was really brilliant. And just one backstory, I've heard from several friends that when they've bid on homes locally, they put an offer in and they get outbid by an out-of-town cash offer for a vacation home. And we could do simple things like pay their transfer fee or have no transfer fee if you're a local, so that the seller is incentivized to, hey, this local buyer, they're going to pay me the exact same price. It's no sweat off my back, but I want to encourage that. And so I'm going to sell it to a local. So just little things, throw it all in there. And then the only thing I'll say on the RVs is like, in concept, it sounds good, but there's so many ways that that can backfire. And, you know, camp RVs they're technically allowed in Walmart parking lot, right? I think they are. That's what I hear. That's what I hear. Walmart opens their parking lot to anybody that wants to park there overnight. But I'm talking about my neighborhood a lot. I've actually heard of people that have rented out visitor parking spaces to people with Sprinter vans. And that is not the purpose of, I understand the intent. The intent should be for locals to be able to use their vans for at least in the summer or whatever. But given how many Sprinter vans and such we have that love to spend time in Frisco, I mean, I could see that really causing some major problems in all neighborhoods in Frisco. So I guess to put it in the positive, I would look for places where that could be managed, that it truly was serving locals and not just making another campground of our town. So that's all I got. Thank you, guys.
Liz, can I ask you just a clarifying question?
Mhm.
Because I agree with you on what we can do as the buy-in scrape is included. That kind of falls in the inclusionary zoning, doesn't it? Like, are those different?
Kind
realms,
of. I mean,
Fundamental underlying policy question for you, council be about density. Or maintaining that density, but putting a caveat on it that once you exceed a certain number of units or a certain percentage, it must be deed restricted. That's a pretty hefty policy question for you guys to answer. So
that's the answer. I was addressing that because I agree. We've all seen it.
Nice venture on top of. Is that all right, Dan?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks. So how do we change the code to be, if you're building 4 units, one of them has to be deed restricted?
I think it could be almost as simple as that. We've got it, because in our current code, we've got a certain number of units per acre that are allowed. So you could set up your zoning, so up to a certain number of units, and then beyond that, it must be deed restricted in some form or fashion.
Right, and right now, I think we're at 6. If you're building more than 6. Is that not the case, Doug?
That's only for cabin housing.
That's only for the
Yeah,
cabin.
cabin housing, I
Right.
believe once you go over 5 units, then you're required to have 1 deed restricted.
Gotcha.
But even our low density zoning districts, it's 8 units to the acre. It's our currently allowed density. So, the minimum lot size is 10,500, which is almost a quarter acre. So basically every conforming lot's allowed at least duplex or 2 standalone townhomes.
Right.
And that's our
Very
lowest
few
density.
people realize that.
That's our lowest density district. So I think because of these density limits that have been on the books since 1983, it's just now the market is there to maximize those where it hasn't been over the decades. And you're starting to see some generational shifts in property ownership in this community as well. That's driving part of that stuff that's been in people's families since the 80s is now changing hands. And it's not going back to a family wanting just a single family house on a half a block.
I think the balance we need to find, those density is a good thing and what we want, but we want people living in those houses, not just density. That's empty.
well, I was gonna say, I think like one thing that I've seen backfire in other communities on inclusionary zoning is, you've got like a complex with 40 units and like 4 and we have a few of those. And so there's really no sense of community. They're not really part of the neighborhood. And to the examples I think of, all over town where you had a single family home and now it's a 4-plex, is making one of those really solving our problem? I mean, it's adding to the balance sheet, but is that really a livable, desirable home for somebody? And I think inclusionary zoning, we need to think really carefully about, would fees and incentives work in a way that the developer would redevelop that property into just straight up a more reasonably priced home, or a couple of more so I don't love the idea of having like a $300,000 unit and a $3 million unit because, and I also don't love the idea of just paying fee in lieu because as we've seen, it's hard to spend our money. We need the opportunities to spend our money. I love the idea of preserving our housing stock within our neighborhoods. And so I worry about inclusionary zoning that it would just turn into something that isn't what we intended. Steamboat used inclusionary zoning. It was a total failure. It's been put on hold for years and years. I think it might be back, but I mean, just if you need a non-success story, look at Steamboat Springs. So for food for thought, I think we should definitely look at it, but there's repercussions too.
Any of these major policy changes, we have a lot of money to continue. Just on the inclusionary zoning commercial linkage thing, from my experience with Vail, one of the unique things that spun off of that was you started having developers knowing they've got these upcoming obligations as part of their projects. Some of them wanted to do on-site units to make their mitigation, but there's a couple savvy developers out there that started buying up the smaller, more rundown townhomes and smaller apartment complexes around town, and then selling those deed restrictions to other developers. So they would buy up, say, an old sixplex from the 1960s that was in pretty rough shape, but it counted as 6 units and they counted as the square footage. And you know, if one of you guys was a developer, I would come to you and say, hey, I just got this little sixplex sitting here on the edge of town, and I know you need some deed restrictions for your new project. So give me X dollars and I will encumber this property. So it created its own little spin-off economy, which was unique. And then you had certain homeowners associations who didn't want those people or didn't want encumbered or deed restricted units in their homeowners associations. So they took actions to raise dues or just put it flat out in their covenants that you cannot have a deed restricted unit in this homeowners association. So there's all sorts of these domino effects with any of these large scale projects. So it's just stuff we would need to think about further if we go into exploring some of these.
That's great. The cabin zoning rule, you know, I was part of actually bringing that forward and years ago, and I think it's really gotten, you know, for that word bastardized to fit what these developers want to do. You know, on the spaces, the idea was that everybody doesn't necessarily want to be living on top of each other. Well, that doesn't mean you build, you know, 4 units that are 3 feet away from each other, you know, just to get a maximum of square footage in order to maximize your dollar, right? You know, and I don't know that that will ever fit again in our view of what we've got going on, because you know, density is where it's at. We're only going to have more and more people, you know, as far as that's concerned. I think with every affordable setup and to really fill in the rental fleet, we need to be looking at as much tiny or micro unit possibilities as, you know, that are out there. It's kind of like Club Med at the Copper. It served a purpose. It actually does pretty well that way, as it's no longer Club Med. You know, I think all of the other opportunities have crossover. Everyone is crossing over with another one where, you know, we need to pursue them all. You know, I don't know what's reasonable on staff or how you go about pursuing all of these, but you know, that's what it is. We need to incentivize long-term rentals by charging short-term rentals in whatever way, shape, or form that we can. You know, I think the hotels, the adaptive reuse, I think it's actually brilliant. And I've already talked to people who are planning on renting at the Alpine Inn, and they're psyched, you know, and that's rental class, and that's filling in something, you know, I mean, it's giving people the ability. So, and as you were saying, inclusionary zoning and
the development standards and commercial linkage, it all works together. You know, we need it all to work in conjunction and you know, I don't know if we need to be hindering the short-term rentals per street or, you know, zoning area on the map or how that's supposed to work. But, you know, short-term rentals, I believe, absolutely need to be looked at as a business proposition, and they need to pay their taxes or fees as they stand. I think that's basically it. That's enough for now. Thank you. I don't know, you know, a ton of that. I think you guys have got a lot to work with at this point in terms of direction. You know, when I think about this, I think really in terms of what's going to deliver capacity for the crisis that we're in now. A lot of the zoning stuff just takes years and years and years to develop, just, you know, a minimal amount of units. And I think at the end of the day, a lot of times it's just not worth the upfront way damage and the political capital it costs to try to get it even to move in that direction. Not saying that they're not without merit, but you know, I'm not familiar enough with impacts of inclusionary zoning, commercial linkages, and really how they relate to what we have going on here to really make a recommendation. I'd look to you guys to do that overall. I really want to get into a workforce housing overlay district and really explore opportunities for you know, changing the way we park stuff, looking at the parking capacity even throughout the town that's underutilized. Maybe there's people who have, you know, parking on their side of their house, in their yard where that they don't use, that'd be happy to get into a program and we can help broker that, you know. There's capacity about. We've talked about rights of ways outside of the town where this conversation was just a couple months ago, where talking about people who organically have evolved parking outside on town right of ways where really it's not problematic. So, you know, maybe there's a way, you've got to get back to that and look at how we're going to codify that so people can just make that more of a regular program. And again, explore capacity where we have it and use it. You know, in terms of its capacity, I think adaptive reuse of hotels, I think based on the direction things have been going with hotels, I think there's a big opportunity there. And I think we need to keep 5A money fresh for that. One of the things that you know, come up with buy down opportunities, and I don't see buy downs back on here, but with Housing Helps 2.0, I think we have an opportunity to participate, to be a bigger player in the market when the right typologies come on the market. And this kind of goes to how we're going to finance some of the other bigger picture stuff. And you know, it seems reasonable to me, and I don't know to what level we can pursue this within the charter of the town. But when you start to see $700,000, $800,000, even $1.1 million units that really fall either in the neighborhood or meet some criteria in terms of being realistically in today's market workforce units, it makes sense for us to make a play on that, buy it, put the covenant on it, and put it back in the market. And if we have 1 or 2 or 3 of these units working at any given point in time, you know, that means we need $3 million in our wallet, right, in 5A funds to work these flips. Right now, and I would like you to speak to what's going on with the ones that you referenced and how that the Housing Helps dollars are coming into play either on the front end or the back end of the deal. But if we see something and we want to start to accrue those workforce covenants and get those units out of the short-term rental market, and it seems like we have the cash, we should buy it. Cover it. This goes to the condo that's over at Mountainside, all these kind of things, and just put it right back in the market. Keep our money working all the time. And it's basically, we're just buying it down for whatever the market says that value of that workforce covenant is. And it's reasonable for us to do it because that's what we want. And the capacity is right there. There's 3 or 4 or 5 units. There's stuff on the market right now we could do that with. And if in fact that 10 to 15% down valuation is real, it seems like we won't be sitting on product very long, so that we're constantly turning these units. And we're just getting out in front. We're guaranteeing that the people we want get those units. We're not waiting for the market to maybe work out for that particular location. So that's something I'd like to see explored a little bit more. There was also something in there, I think, where we talked about setting this up with Housing Helps 2.0 and that incentive for long-term rentals, where we have a package that really makes sense for investors long-term, because it's an investment decision at the end of the day. And if we can set that up on those kind of deals, maybe that's what we get. Maybe we buy it, and then we have some brokers who are in the field for us looking at this kind of stuff. They've got a buyer who's just looking for that long-term play. And we've done enough for them with what we do with, lease guarantees, we're vetting the tenants, we're inspecting the homes. We're doing some things like that to make sure that they're getting a high probability long-term tenant that's going to respect their space. I don't see why, unless we're precluded from doing that, I think we should really be looking hard. So, and again, I want to hear where we're at on those deals where we're trying to turn those with some respected buyers, I guess. So those are the things that I want to focus on is getting into hotel rooms when we can, whether it's a block of 5 or 10 or 15 to do that. And really getting back to incentivizing those STRs to be long-term rentals. I think they're out there. If there's a program, and again, it was referenced in the great work that you did in bringing the different programs that are working across the different municipalities. The idea that there's, in terms of landing pad units, if we can get somebody in for 3 months, 6 months, or 9 months, that's all they need to be there. We don't necessarily need to find year rentals where we relocate the people who primarily bought this particular house for the use derivative. I think that's a long shot. But I think that if we know there's a bank of units where people are like, yeah, I'm good for 3 months. I'm not, yeah, if you got somebody who can go in there, and again, from a Housing Helps 2.0 standpoint, we vet, we inspect, we protect. I think there's going to be people who would much rather have somebody in there for 3 months or 6 months or even 9 months. And then people move on because that's the time they have to be in their landing pad unit to find something else. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, not easy to set up, but again, the capacity's there, and we just have to come up with the cash to change the utilization. And it is, trust me, I've been saying this for years, I think, it's cash. You got to put cash on the table to change the practice. And that's where it is. In terms of STR caps, I think it's reasonable at some point. I know this kind of came up in the Breckenridge conversation, I think, where they've done their cap and then they said the licenses would not be transferable in the sale. And I think that's a mistake. I think if you put a cap on something, if somebody has that use as part of their revenue and economic model for their investment, I think we need to respect that. I think they ought to be able to sell it with that. It doesn't change ultimately the number. So from the outside perspective, there's no change, but it does protect the value and the investment of the person who has it. It doesn't matter. And I think the comment I saw in the paper was, we've never done it, so we're not doing it. But when you change the market, you got to change that attribute. So if we were to go to a cap, that's one thing I would really like to see is that you can sell it, sell that with your sale. So I think that's important. But anyway, can you talk about what's going on with those Housing Helps 2.0s right now and where the money's coming into play? Either.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'd be happy to share that.
I would like to hear that.
Pretty exciting. So the first transaction is actually a property where it's a current owner. So sort of the option where we're looking to do the buy down on the current property. And so that transaction is actually taking a little bit longer. Appraisals are taking 3 to 4 weeks, if not longer,
on a transaction that doesn't have a purchase contract. So it has to be somebody with some patience that's looking to sort of go through this process right now, because the money and the appraisals, it has to tie hand in hand, right? That's part of our criteria. So I need the appraisal, which I just got for that one. So I'm actually going to be having a meeting actually with Tony here this week to kind of go through those logistics. The other two applications that I've gotten are pretty quick deals. They are actually a purchase option. So I'm having to just kind of play like the real estate agent on the side along with the transaction, because all of those dates affect the transaction. And if the town wasn't to give the down payment assistance, we need to ensure that the buyer can back out accordingly to not lose their earnest monies. Just something I'm learning through this process as we're going through these right now. But I just got the appraisal on both of those, so I'll have it teed up for Tony this week on all three. It's about $250,000. So we'll get 3 covenants, the live work only occupancy, and we'll get those secured with the closings probably by the end of the month. So that's what's going on with those 3 deals. I can also say I'm getting a lot of interest right now. I've got probably at least 4 or 5 folks who want to very much help in the community with a long-term rental. They've recently acquired a property. They're not a short-term rental. Maybe it's been used as a second home and they've never rented, and they want to know if the town has a program in place. They really want us to help them secure a tenant, get workforce in there. What can we do to help them? So that's some just feedback for that process as we're looking through the checklist.
People are trying to follow up on that real quick. So, for example, case study, I know somebody in town, they have a rental unit. This is kind of brings it to exactly what we're talking about. And, he bought it, there was a tenant in there, he wanted to keep her in there. You could easily short-term this, pick a number, $4,000, $4,200 a month. Even at at market rate, long-term rental, you could be at $4,000 a month. And he's keeping her in there at $3,400, right? Or $3,200. And, only doing it because, so really that's what we're talking about is we want that guy doing that. But at some point he says that $8,400 a year, at some point my kid's gonna want to go to college. And, so how are we helping all those people? The people you're talking about, this person who's doing that, the people who we want to transition across. So that, that's going to, I think, do more to create capacity in the short term than anything else. In terms of the housing helps 2.0, what are you getting from mortgage holders? What kind of compliance rate do you have on people, on the people who hold the mortgages and agreeing to the workforce covenant? Because don't they have to approve that?
I don't have any details yet for ours because we haven't closed any yet. I'd have to do some further analysis with like the county or
What is their
something.
compliance rate? Are there local banks like Alpine, General?
I mean, it's been my understanding in working with Jason Dietz, because we tend to feed a lot off the county's folks because they think some of the properties in Frisco are the county versus, what have you. And so they are primarily working with local lenders. So when we're talking local lenders, we're talking Alpine Bank, we're talking First Bank, Bank of the West, people that are very oriented with where the town's coming in, what the covenant is, what's coming into play. The 2 that I have the person has it under contract, it's not a local lender right this very moment, but he has secured deals through the county with this lender, with their housing helps program. So I feel confident. I sent some stuff to that lender today. I think we'll work through whatever questions he might have.
Right.
But I don't have enough information yet for Frisco's purposes.
I'm just curious, because that's the first thing somebody needs to know is my mortgage company. Okay.
Do we need to retain a real estate agent for you?
We have one on retainer. We have a broker on retainer.
Do you need to access that real estate agent?
Maybe more to come.
Because instead of recreating the wheel and you taking time to have to learn real estate, like we should have somebody you can ask easily, at least.
Yeah.
Right?
We can revisit that as to what that looks like.
Sure.
I would just chime in with Dan and maybe we can keep moving this other But I agree on the buying, like talking to Rick Holman, the town manager at Breck, he sounds like he's buying a property or two a week almost doing that. Just slap the restriction on, put them back out there. I think that
And
would
are
be
they
good.
making money on those?
No, they're subsidizing.
They are.
So, yeah. But I think I'm still leery of getting rid of any rental that we have, because that's where our biggest need is by tenfold. So I think for me personally, like we hold on to Mountainside, we hold on to every single rental we have, because as soon as we sell them, they're no longer rentals. And that's where the biggest void is. But I think that's a different conversation moving, down the road with, we do an inventory adjustment or whatever else we need to do. But I think, yeah, we have some cash, maybe we look at that conversation while we're in the budget session of starting to implement some of what Dan's saying, because I agree with that. I just also add an idea I've been kicking around. I haven't thought it through to probably the obvious end that I'm not coming up with, but if we go down the route of a cap on short-term rentals, which I'm not opposed to, do we tie that cap and that number to the amount of deed restrictions we have in our town to try to also then incentivize people, the developer who wants to buy and scrape something and put up 4 units, and he finds out that, hey, the town needs 3 more deed restrictions before we release 2 more short-term rental license. I'm gonna, do 2 workforce housing here, and then 4 rental license might come on the market. I don't know how that would look exactly, but there are 2 problems. We don't have workforce housing, and we have a growing problem with the amount of short-term rentals. Let's marry the 2, that then they have to work together to kind of solve some of that problems. And I don't know what that would look like, but keeps coming up in my mind. If those are the 2 issues, how do we make them kind of mutually beneficial in some way?
Well, I think I'm sorry, that's the idea is, I hear this a lot in terms of there's too many STRs. Well, I don't know that there's too many. I know that there's an imbalance. And if you approach it from that standpoint, and you put if there's going to be a temporary cap or a cap for some period of time, the idea is while we generate revenue units, I think it creates the potential and the realization that, yeah, then you can start to come back and grow the short term, because it really is about balance. So I don't know that there's a nexus study that says that there's an algorithm that's going to tell you exactly how many or to what degree. But I think we experientially we can all attest to it. But I think the number of lodging units right now really delivered this economy to a great deal where it is that everybody's enjoying it, and it's great. There's been this monster demographic shift that's really brought into, again, this relief, this, and really kind of delivered this housing crisis to us. But reducing the number of short-term rental units does not necessarily deliver capacity the way we've seen some things suggested. So be careful about that. And I think transitioning keeping the lights on in the units, whatever we do, is really important. I don't want to do anything that's going to just encourage people just to now that capacity is gone, and I need to be very careful and calculating that, maybe turn back.
One thing that we have not talked about, I don't think we've talked about, is just blocking up rentals ourselves and being a little bit like not owning them, but when we see them coming on the market, securing them in a block of basically town controlled units that we would then pass on to our own employees, or
Like a master lease.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I know that's mostly viable in like a complex that, especially in a newer one, but I guess I'm thinking more like as we look in the Summit Daily and we see attractive rentals. And this was an idea that really seemed popular at the beginning of the summer because we had such staffing shortages. But in the same sort of spirit, we could sort of be that middle person between not only rentals for our employees, but also for, say, our Main Street businesses. Maybe they're not in a position to do that, but I think it really, if the lack of rentals is sort of what threatens them the most. not having people that can actually work and live in Frisco. And so I'd love us to explore being that middle person.
And I think some of these people that have expressed interest in right now
Mhm.
are very much looking for that kind of option.
Mhm.
Because to put together an incentivization program for STRs and LTRs and the criteria and who's going to administer that. I mean, we've got 4 people that want to rent right now.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, the person just purchased the 4-bedroom. I was thinking seasonals, you know, kind of right out of the gate. You know, we've got issues with parking in some of other complexes that we have rentals in. You know, that could be a win-win and it's furnished potentially. So yeah, I certainly am for that.
Andrew, did you have any? Lost the video from my screen.
No, this is a good conversation. My only, my overriding thoughts are really just all of the above is where we start, because this is all the stuff that is not build our way out of the problem. This is utilizing our existing housing stock to reflect our goals for the community. So this is, to me, where the focus should be. And also, if it needs dollars, it's where the dollars should go. The other part is, let's stay reasonable in the fact that we are just Frisco, meaning let's not chase a major change in zoning and things like that, respecting the fact that we are pretty built out. You know, we have some spot lots, we have a few developments which we can all put our finger on. So doing major development rezoning, how much staff time does that take relative to doing some other things that would probably result in, higher conversions to what we're trying to create here. So, but other than that, great conversations. You guys have covered it.
Follow-up clarification, you guys.
I'm sorry?
Critical piece is the financing.
Yeah, well, the 5A fund, then, just as a warning, because I want to be respectful for everybody's time, I'll probably call it at like 6:20 so we can take a break, transition to dinner, and the county will be here so we can talk about a little project over off the Dam Road. So, sound good? Great.
Wizard of all revenue projection numbers. I won't take any credit. But that being said, we really just tried to be conservative on some of the numbers. Obviously, I could have gone heavier on SCHA fund and what we're getting in for revenue. I could have gone heavier on numbers with expenditures as well. But I think we just tried to find a good average, a good balance, just to put some perspective on the projection. And really, I think the point of this slide is that the 5A funds are not enough to accomplish the housing goals that we're headed towards and that you already have in place that you want to have accomplished and achieved. As you can see there, we start to get into a deficit at the end of 2022. Significantly increases a further deficit over 3 million in 2023 to almost double in 2024. I don't think that's really point of this slide. And then we kind of took it a step further, and we can kind of come back to this. But there's an excise tax out there. Some people are doing that. Telluride, Crested Butte has an excise tax. We wanted to put, if one was to be out there and approved by a vote in Frisco, if you would want that direction, what that would do to your housing funds. And obviously it has some change there with the projections to not be 6 million in the red, but potentially 1 million. So finding other revenue sources is really what the point of this slide, to try and help create more housing opportunities for Frisco. I collect the numbers speak for themselves. That's the bottom line. And then just the last line was really just some more analysis of other towns, communities that are doing STR regulations, what their current compiled taxes are for an STR, where Frisco falls into play there as well. And then Soleil did some more projections on a 5%, 7.5%, and a 10% excise tax, just to play around with some of those numbers there. And currently, the STR tax total is 10.75% for STRs. So we are on the lower side.
To be clear, what's that, what is that operating on the rental amounts or on the value? So what is that levied on?
The rental revenue is right at
Rental revenue each time.
every night you stay, that's taxed 10.7 to 5% currently. But we're proposing to add on an excise tax coming in the ballot April 2022. And all of these projections are assuming like if it passes and collection starts June of 20.
So for those, because so Soleil, who's one of our finance wizards, just to answer Councilmember's Fallon question, just said that currently that tax is collected on the nightly rate collected by the short-term rental or submitted by the short-term rental owner for a nightly rate. And so what we're looking at here is just how that could be expanded if we do put a ballot question up for April 2022 to the voters for increasing this excise tax. So sorry, so there's just no microphone and you want to make sure. So.
Tell you, based on my experience in Beaver Creek, because we were very cognizant of cost there, since we had one of the highest costs of any destination in the country. We learned that unless you're a large group, you pay virtually no attention to the excise or sales tax impact on your bill. Never gets raised, does not depress demand from our experience. And there are many studies that support the same thing. Again, unless you're a large group where you're taking down 500, 1,000 rooms, that makes a difference. And they'll weigh that when they make decisions as far as what destinations they choose. But for families, vacationers, they virtually never look at that to make their decisions.
And this will be only for short-term rentals. This proposal, this projections it's not including hotels. It's all short-term rental licenses, renters, should stay for less than 30 days.
Tax accrues to its own fund. You're saying that the excise tax will accrue to 5A, to the 5A fund.
That's the determination you make.
The projection for the 5A currently revenue we received, and we'll add this on to just sustain the expenses of projections of projects already in place, like the CEDA. We have year 3, we proposed a new development just to continue.
At the very least, it puts some of the onus back onto the short-term rentals, and it charges them as more of a business, just because they should be paying more. But are you saying that we'll end up raising this in another couple of years again? Or
We'd have to go to the voters each time.
we would have to go to the voters. So we would end up looking at a deficit of still a few million in a few years towards this, right? So we would have to get creative with where we're getting that from.
Yes, the excise tax was just one example
Yeah.
to show a possible opportunity for another funding source that kind of takes us back to a list a little bit more. But
Sure. So yes.
We just brought the 5 and the 7.5 and the 10 just to give you an idea.
Yeah. Maybe that's good.
Not that I'm proposing, but someone that's your maybe going, they're putting 15% excess tax in their ballot this year. So I think I'm comfortable looking at and pursuing the conversation around the 7.5%.
No, I think so. I know, I agree. I think it's one of those things that, if you're trying to keep you're as a short-term rental operator or any lodging or any business owner, you try to respond to that in terms of what this local municipality is trying to accomplish with it. And it puts you in a price disadvantage against your competitors, again, any commodity, so to speak, whereas, short-term rentals or any other commodity in the same situation. You're probably going to just keep your prices depressed because you don't want to outstrip the market right away. So I don't think people on the outside are necessarily going to perceive Frisco as being more expensive. Because I don't think the excise tax in all cases is going to be necessarily transferred directly into, it's not going to necessarily need to be passed through. I think people are going to be sensitive to having to raise their short-term rental rates year over year. And I think it might take a little while to get that incorporated into their rental rate. So I don't think it necessarily puts Frisco lodging at a disadvantage. I think that's what I'm trying to say. So I definitely think it's something we could look at because we've been looking for that nexus event for short-term rentals that helps ameliorate that impact without going to having to necessarily do that nexus study. And I think the advantage or the benefit of a tax question is that most people in town, I think, the idea that there's an impact resonates, even though it hasn't been quantified necessarily. But most people have a story about how it's impacted them. So I see it depending on the number. I see that having the potential to be a successful task.
And just to clarify, this excise tax will be paid by the renter. not the
Right.
owner.
No, understood. Yeah.
Some people do adjust the rate.
This would be our challenge as we're selling it before it became a ballot measure that people need to understand. It's not the owner that's gonna end up paying for it.
Like, I think that's what's in the majority of our short-term rental licenses.
So there's that too.
So, yeah, there's a.
Right, but we want everyone else to vote for it.
Do you think 10 minutes is enough to run through the financing?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
Thank you so much.
Screens back up. Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay.
So the real estate investment fee, we sort of had talked through that with Bonnie and Soleil. I don't know right now that it's ever historically been used for housing primarily. We would need to do a little further analysis and some of the amendments to that specific code ordinance around that. But it is something you could certainly think about doing, and we just need to take some more time to look at that further. Obviously, we just talked about the short-term rental excise tax, the housing impact fee. Council did discuss that back in I think June 8th. We kind of talked a little bit about that when the town of Breckenridge was working with a consultant agreement to look further into that study. Short-term rental or second homeowner tax could be another alternative, again, sort of addressing some of that occupancy issues too, primarily around that. Low-income housing credits, again, just as another funding mechanism that we could try and use, but that's primarily for units and developments that are over 25 units in size. Obviously, I'm keeping track of all of the legislative affordable housing and funding and grants as all of those programs start to trickle down, as well as the infrastructure bill. So there's money, there's programs, just trying to keep up with all of that so we can certainly try and have some shovel-ready projects and get funding where we can. I wanted to be quick with that because I know with time I would have spent a lot more time on all of those things, but the staff report was pretty thorough, so hopefully we can kind of just go through the checklist.
Questions on any of that? And one thing I'd throw out to council is, for those who don't know, we do own 2 mine claims up on Ophir Mountain. And maybe this is the time, I don't think they'll be worth money that will like be a game changer, but I'm sure there's a place where we could get those put into why we purchased them, which is long-term protection of that land, but get some cash out of those. Now might be a good time to pursue that as an option. Council thinks about that, but I think we spent roughly just shy of 300,000 on those. So, get much more than that, but I think that's still, that could be three more or four more of the housing helps programs that we've already heard are being successful tonight. Get that land into a conservancy of some sort, and then use themselves. The options are there, and I think that would be, I'm curious to see how you guys feel about that. Yeah.
I never even knew that existed, so, you know, I don't know how important it is to conserve some of these mining claims that are just up in the woods at this point. You know,
So the history was that the developer came with the best I've heard is, so if anybody knows better, but with a development proposal to put a bunch of units, it's right above the hospital on the hill. And the
Interesting.
town purchased them to preserve that space and view.
And so if you could sell them with the caveat of,
So it'd probably be, I mean, like a lot of deals that have been done where, yeah, we just, you know, they go back to the Forest Service through some complex deal where somebody else needs an offset of land for something they're doing somewhere else. We get money, Forest Service gets that land back, or Colorado Land Trust or someone else.
Could be part of that Frisco backyard plan as well.
No.
No, I think that's a good example of, we just need to understand what the options are specific to that opportunity. So going from throwing them all in a pile to maybe analyzing that one just a little bit further to see what might be possible.
It's just a good, make everyone aware of it, and yeah, maybe as we pursue some of these more, we can revisit that at a time. Yeah, they're there in our portfolio. Probably riding your bike across. Anything else? Thank you for this. This was amazing. I think this was a good conversation. I think a lot of us have been wanting to have, and it's a little more helpful starting to get us directed. I think it's working away at it. You have everything's clear in your notes for now until you walk away.
One thing just to clarify to help us out with direction, going back to the two lots in the park, there seems to be a common interest in preservation of that. But on one hand, perhaps the First and Main as a traditional open green space, and the 113 Granite as kind of a space, but for artists in residence and maybe other incubation type of opportunities. Would that satisfy the council if that's how we framed it?
I think the 113, I heard good support to come up with a nice creative idea of kind of
Yeah.
how that could be. I think
Mhm.
the First and Main might need to be its independent work session to flush that out, because I think we're in different pages there. So I think keeping the First and Main, like, not let it get lost in the mix, because it needs to be a part of the conversation, but I think it needs some more of its own dedicated time. Fair.
dedicated, it'd be great to have input from the planning commission and whatnot for these particulars as well.
Okay.
And I think just looking at it as a campus instead of just a park surrounded by a bunch of random stuff. And so how those two parcels fit into that campus, like for the First and Main, there's probably a whole handful of ideas that really would have merit, that might not be green space, but it's also not purely commercial either.
Something that you referenced, kind of like what we worked out in what's rest. Yes.
I think I'm
Conversation.
gravitating towards that, you know, listen to you, because First and Main for me was always for a long time, but I think what you're talking about resonates a bit more, and then I think the way you characterize that makes a lot more sense. I think when you look at that holistically from the car, it starts to make sense, and I'd like to carve that out as a separate conversation, because if it makes sense to take those out of the housing conversation.
Okay.
Fair enough, yeah.
Tony, does that help?
Mhm.
Great.
And maybe for me, just on the other opportunities that we talked about with the incentivization for a long-term sort of rental program, I got the feedback that that's sort of higher up on the list for council. I also did just complete the short-term rental survey that I sent out to all of our active STR owners around, would you be interested in this, with a lot of variable questions. And so I think of all of the topics we sort of talked about, that's kind of on the forefront. I think from staff's perspective, from my perspective, if that would be something you would want us to come back with, to share with you what results. We got 465 responses, a 72 response rate. So we've got some really good data that we didn't have before that could tie into maybe that conversation of a rental program. Okay.
When prepared.
No, when I'm prepared, yes, but I just wanted to make sure we don't lose sight of that, because it's, it's certainly fresh on their minds as well, since we just completed that survey.
So much, guys. Great conversation. Let's take 10 minutes, grab dinner, get county. Good.
Thank you.
Want them sitting, are they eating with us?
Yeah.
You want them sitting right
Yeah,
there?
we definitely. Let's do that. Thanks Jennifer, for the reminder. I'm just such like a look at people talker, so it's.
And we are keeping cameras and mics on because Councilmember Aronson is participating through Zoom through dinner, so.
What I need, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Lips. You see?
Yeah, do you have any examples of
Is
kind
there
of
somebody that I need to?
this campus concept?
Okay, just remember where my
Go to
name-
Recreate, look at their, look at their campus.
What do you got for me?
Take a spin
I
through
got you.
there.
Okay.
And what I was not, Vanessa knows the full history, but it started with them just buying the tin shop
Mhm.
and then redeveloping
that's out there that we all know of, that's established. We get to start a conversation really moving things forward in a way and with a group that we haven't had in the past. So I think this is a great time for all of us to kind of, one, we haven't gotten a chance to sit together since most of you have been elected. So congratulations on all of that. Welcome to the party. But two, we haven't had this conversation amongst ourselves as to what we want to do with Lake Hill and how we can make that happen and accomplish that sooner rather than later, because we all know I think it's needed. So with that, I think I have, unless anything else, or Scott or Tamara, you guys want to?
I do want to send Commissioner Lawrence his regrets. She actually was planning on being here, but some of you may know we contemplated and passed a moratorium on short-term rentals today. And so Elizabeth is meeting with one of the HOAs that is in our identified opportunity zones. So we had to do a bit of a divide and conquer, but she very much wanted to be in here. Sadly, we've not mastered cloning at the county level yet. So here we are.
Sometimes it does feel like she's in multiple places.
We have a hard time picking up. I just want to thank you all for giving us some time tonight. We are very much looking forward to this conversation and having a very collaborative relationship on this project and other things, of course, as we move forward. So you want to add anything else, Josh? We also, I think you all have copies of the memo that we've put together on the current status of Lake Hill. So we're happy to answer any questions that may arise from that memo. But then our hope, I think, is that we can talk specifically about some of the next steps identified in the memo, if that works for you as a process. Also thought it might be helpful for Scott to give a bit of an update on where we are with Frisco Sanitation, if that is of interest to folks.
I think it would. Yeah, maybe we start with that, because that'll probably be a quicker conversation, less discussion, and or update and less conversation. So
for those of you that I may or may not have met, Scott Margo, Summit County's manager. Hello, everybody. So we have met now a couple of times with Frisco Sand District. First meeting was with staff and their chair. Second meeting was with their, was at a formal board meeting of theirs. Full board wasn't there, but a quorum was there. And we set up the first discussion to talk about what the analysis had shown from following the town of Frisco sort of build out analysis that was done, what that meant to Frisco Sand District in terms of its capacity, and what kind of expansion would be required and what kind of costs were tied to that. And essentially the outcome of that study was that Lake Hill was about a third of the total build out or increased build out number for the town of Frisco and for the Frisco Sand District's boundaries. And the total cost was estimated at around $8 million for the expansion that would be necessary at the plant. We had been told that if Lake Hill were to come in and wanted to be included in the district, that we were going to have to cover the cost of that expansion. So we went to the first meeting and talked about the concerns that we had about that, the idea of burdening a workforce housing project with the full cost of an expansion, that at this time is not necessary. And at the time that we'll say phase one, really potentially all of Lake Hill is developed, may still not necessitate an expansion of the Frisco Sand District plant. What we asked for was some consideration for a proposal where we would pay Lake Hill's share of any of the on-site improvements that were required. So all of the extension of lines, pump station on the property, the share of all of the tap fees that we would be responsible for Lake Hill. And then assuming we were included at that point and assuming that they hit their capacity thresholds that would trigger either the design for an expansion or the expansion itself, if they were short capital investment funds to make either of those or both of those happen, that the county would pick up whatever the gap was. So we're assuming that as Lake Hill is moving forward, that there's other development taking place. And as that development takes place, they're also paying their share. They're paying their fees as well. Those dollars are getting set aside in some form or another in a capital investment fund. And so we said, whatever that gap is that's left, whether it's $1 million or $8 million, that we would then cover that cost. So that was what we then went forward and presented to their board. I will say that the conversation with the board was reasonably pleasant. There seemed to be a few members that were not supportive of the general concept of Lake Hill. And they were talking very clearly in that discussion about, well, we need to separate our personal feelings about that development from our role as Frisco Sand District board members, which I thought was a good thing for them to express publicly. And then we received a few weeks later a letter from their attorney saying that they were not willing to take Lake Hill on, that they couldn't take any kind of capital investment on because they're dealing with some other discharge permit issues with the state and concerned about some other regulatory issues that may come down the road. And so I responded to that and said, well, perhaps the proposal we just made wasn't as clear as we had hoped, because it was our intention to say there is no risk for Frisco Sand District and existing ratepayers. We will cover the cost at the end of the day, if or when it becomes necessary. And then we got another response back from them saying, we are not, because of the issues around our discharge permit, we are not willing at this point to entertain any inclusion of anybody that's outside of the district. And so at this point, we have a hard stop on any kind of inclusion within the district. And so one of the next steps within that memo is if you guys are comfortable and we're able to move forward with rezoning processes, pre-development services, with town of Frisco water in some way or another, we would love to have the town of Frisco come with us to have another follow-up conversation with the Frisco Sand District and see if we can't make any progress with them in moving it forward. Our other options are to look at other districts. So Joint Sewer Authority, we've looked at several others as part of our analysis process. And all of those are more expensive alternatives. There's also a package plant alternative that cost-wise is more expensive and may face some real significant regulatory challenges at the state, where they don't like to see more of those package plants discharging into the lake when there's another wastewater treatment plant just up the road. And so again, we don't want to give up on taking or being included within Frisco Sand District, but right now we haven't been given a lot of hope that they're going to move forward with us on that. So we'd hope to have some support from you guys.
Yeah, but my old waiter skills coming into play. I'll ask a question while you read this.
Hunter, can I just ask, what does support from us mean?
Support would, from my perspective, and commissioners jump in, from my perspective, it would be a united front expressing the need for this project, the willingness of the town of Frisco to participate in the project, to again be involved with providing the water. And again, we've made a very similar proposal to the town of Frisco as it relates to water to what we've made to the Frisco Sand District. And so we're very excited to hear how that conversation went within the town of Frisco as well. But that's what I would see in terms of support. It's really the two governments combining to say, we really believe this is necessary. We think this is a good project and we want to see what we can do to help to get it included within the district and have that provision of sanitary sewer services.
And I would just add that both the town of Breck and the town of Silverthorne have expressed their support for this to move forward. So perhaps a joint letter from all of us to Frisco Sand, just encouraging them to think out of the box to try and get to a place that would work for this project. That would be very helpful.
So I would just say, I think that's such a great segue to one, I think just theme that I would love to relay is that I think generally speaking, we all very much support Lake Hill, but we haven't sat around the table together. And so just in the same way that you expressed you would like us to join you at the Sand District, I think whoever those partners are, it's like planning any project without all the players around the table. And so, I hope that this conversation is the start of that, where we can really begin to collaborate and start pinning some things down and understanding the details around things like water, around things like sanitation, and water treatment. So I'm kind of glad we started there because that's one thing that, you know, we can all do a better job of moving forward to really get this thing off the ground and begin collaborating. So.
Questions on sanitation part of-
I haven't discussed with sanitation at all. And, yes, I would say we are in support of moving forward with this idea, but we would need to know the challenges from our own. Sanitation issue.
Like just what the regulatory issues they're worried about that are coming, or just follow up?
Well, I think there's multiple things as sort of to what Melissa's saying, without a developer, on this whole thing, it's all pretty arbitrary at this point, relatively. For the sake of saying we're on board and we want to move forward, yes, but we really don't know what this is going to entail. So to sign something like our agreement tonight, if this is an agreement, I'm not sure I'm ready to sign this myself, but we want to make this thing happen. We want to see it all go. We understand that we need infrastructure and we need to fortify our infrastructure for the incoming influx of people that we're all going to be dealing with, whether we like it or not. And sorry, I should be doing just like this. So yes, if this is just the starting point and do we want to work together? Yes, we want to work together. That's where that's going to go. I'm definitely not going to put up that we're going to convince our metro district of doing something they don't want to do, or they don't believe we should do, or anything like that. I think we need a lot more information. But we want this thing to happen. That's probably good for me. Thank you.
This kind of goes to timeline, and I can't decide the head of the board because I have no idea what their operating principles are, whatever criteria that were brought to bear to inform their decision. But when you have that conversation with them about, we need this capacity, is it represented in the context of a timeline? In other words, hey, we want to have shovels in the dirt next summer, for example. So their reluctance to proceed was based on a timeline that you presented, or is it more of a general kind of de facto, yeah, we're going to continue to find things that are keeping us busy so that we don't do this kind of thing?
Yeah, I think that the conversation that we had with them, there wasn't any sort of a timeline suggested that we were looking to move this forward in the next 6 months or even 12 months. That really, what we were prefacing that conversation on was, in order to go through or to get through the rezoning process of that property, in the same regard for water as with sewer, we need to have those letters or notices to serve in place before we can finalize a rezoning. And so we showed them all of the phasing, and that, basically that rezoning is we'll call it a 6 to 12 month process, probably, if things go smoothly. And then we've got a lot of infrastructure work to do offsite before we're going to have anything coming out of the ground that would be impacting either water or sewer for that project. So we're multiple years down the road before we're going to see any vertical construction, maybe 2 years at the very earliest, but much more likely it's 3 or 4 years out before we see stuff coming out of the ground.
Ask you a clarifying question, and
Yeah.
I know this has been discussed, but I have not been at the meeting where it was. And so for my benefit, for a rezoning, is that your code or is that state statute that dictates that you have to have those letters to serve? And to be totally transparent, what I'm getting at is, why can't you proceed with rezoning in order to hopefully demonstrate the entitlement and the density before getting that service, that something can get rolling.
Yeah, so it is our county code that dictates the need, again, to fully execute a rezoning. It's our intent to try to continue negotiations in parallel with the rezoning effort. We've been trying to be very careful with regards to partnerships and relationships with the town of Frisco and others to not get in front of anybody that is a partner in this project, so town of Frisco included. So for us to go out and say, we're going to start to rezone without some level of support or approval from the town of Frisco, we didn't want to do that. And so that's the reason, that's part of the next steps that's in that memo, is we want to get a sense from this council that you're comfortable with us beginning that rezoning process. And then we will. And as we're doing that rezoning process, we'll be also going through the process to try to, again, figure out what we're going to do on the sewer side, figure out exactly what we're going to do, hopefully with the town of Frisco on the water side as well.
I'd also add, I think there's a very real and pragmatic consideration, which is the feds and the state are spending a lot of money right now on housing. And for us to get in line for any of those dollars for this project, we have to be able to demonstrate a capacity to provide water and sewer. It's sort of the reality of the funding landscape as it stands with DOLA right now. So, you know, I don't want, I've said this a number of times, but I don't want us to miss the opportunity to leverage. I mean, the state's gonna roll out $450 million sometime next session. And I would like for us to be shovel ready in their eyes to leverage some of those funds, because I think we're gonna need them to make this project work.
And to that point, it isn't, there are opportunities, there are funds that are designated specifically for infrastructure. We know that we're gonna have to improve roads. We know that there's lots of impacts that we're gonna have to mitigate. And to the extent that we can really look at creative ways to access those funds, the more we can demonstrate that this is a collaborative effort in the community, or at least that we have support from multiple jurisdictions, is really important. And we know some of those funds sunset by 2024. And we know that this takes time. And so that's why we're, again, wanting to have these conversations.
I think so. I mean, Scott, you kind of referenced it, but I think the important next step is definitely the water part. You know, I think, in my opinion, I'd love just to kind of go around the horn, but just so it's really clear, I am a huge proponent that we've got to get this going for all the reasons mentioned and more that we haven't talked with you guys about, but we've just spent the last 2 hours talking housing. So like you guys, we've kind of lived it today. But I think for those who don't know, Commissioner Pogue's also on the state committee to figure out how to distribute and best allocate all of that funding. So we do have good knowledge of what's going on. So I think that's a benefit to us. And I don't want to miss out on any of that locally that we could possibly get, especially in the past. One of the big things hanging over this is like, we'll never be able to afford the infrastructure. Now, I don't think that's actually a barrier. I think we can say that there's ways to get that to go. And so I think that's a benefit. For me, the water's always been an issue, but I think we've had good.
I would too.
How did that get on there?
Honey, I don't.
I didn't have any money with my dinner, but that's okay. Is the water part. And I think we've had good conversations and we've started conversations, and my not even problem, but the conversation I'm comfortable that we can say from my standpoint and hearing from the rest of the council that we can figure out a way to make sure that we have enough water to make this project work one way or another. And I am supporting personally saying to the county, like, we will in negotiations while you're rezoning and starting your process, we'll work through the water conversation and negotiations. But definitely my fear, to be honest and open, is I can't solve the housing crisis and then put Frisco in a 10-year, 20-year water crisis. And there's definitely ways we can address that. And that's what I know we can work towards. We've done it in the past with the county commons agreement. We have a framework and a history where we've already done this well and amicably in the past, and there's no reason we can't. And so doesn't mean there was fun or easy conversations, and they involve lawyers and lots of funny words and lots of pages, but I think we can get there. And that would be my take. And I'd love to hear from the rest of the council, just so the board knows, and we can kind of help in that memo they sent with the next steps. We can move, or in my opinion, help move this forward. But I might be a lone ranger, but I'd love to hear from council.
For me,
I'll chime in. Do you want to add more? No?
I'll wait.
Okay. Well, because I've thought a lot about this and why are we sort of hung up? Why can't we get off the dime on these conversations with water and other considerations? So what I really kind of came to is to kind of be a little philosophical about this is that we sort of overarching have similar objectives, but really we're coming at this from different places. And I think that I'll speak for the town as a community member of Frisco. We're concerned, it's not in our town, but it's really in our town. And we're concerned about how such a large development will impact the character of our town, the services of our town, of course, the physical infrastructure and capacity and things like that. And so by kind of biting it off or agreeing to it in one fell swoop, there's always been this sort of hesitancy, not to say we don't support it, but there's been a hesitancy to say, well, is this really, can we really absorb this into our town without having dramatic positive or negative changes to so many different aspects of our community? And whether or not we feel that way personally, on a personal level or individual, we know community members feel that way. And so we've been really careful about sort of representing that throughout the master planning process and then in these sort of interim discussions that we've had. So I would look to the water agreement. I realize for me, I'm a planner. I've worked in development a long time. I think annexation is something that should be on the table. I realize that's not a popular idea. So I'm not gonna, really strongly advocate for that. But in the same way that an annexation agreement would serve the purpose to sort of work out these deal points, I look to our water agreement to work out the deal points. And so how do we have some kind of land use control over this? How do we have a seat at the table? What exactly are we paying for? How exactly are we not only contributing physical water, but are we going to be looked to subsidize our tap fees or anything like that? And similarly, if another jurisdiction wants to throw money in the pot, they should be around the table too, so that we can all really understand how this is going to work. And so that was kind of my epiphany, is that, we all want housing, but we're sort of coming at this and we just need to align our objectives together so that we can find the solution. Because right now we're kind of missing, I think, collective. I think Dan gets them. Dan understands the collective objective, which is housing. But the community character, we're a very small town, having such a large urban development on the side of such a small town without being in the town is kind of unusual. And so how do we have some control over that?
Yeah, and Melissa, that's a really good point. And we have had those conversations in some of those previous meetings talking about it goes through a county rezoning process, but trying to make sure that there's representation from the town of Frisco involved in that process. It has certainly been something that we've talked about. We haven't said the A word in probably 5 years, because we were told very clearly not to say that word ever again. And so we have stayed away from that. But 5 years ago, we were talking about exactly that, an annexation agreement to try to work through this. But then again, we were told full stop on any conversation around annexation. And so if a water agreement is a vehicle that we can use to try to get some comfort around what this looks like, or what the involvement is of the town council, of town staff, community outreach, all of those kinds of things through that process, we certainly don't have any issue with doing that. That's been part of our conversations over the years. It just hasn't been a lot of forward momentum. And to the question with regards to the community character and the impact, we did do, and this was in partnership with the town of Frisco, we did do the impact analysis. And so originally that was going to be a meeting, I don't know what it was, a month and a half ago, probably something like that. And then maybe it was going to be tonight to walk through that impact analysis, which I think we should do as the next sort of order of business, is for the town council and for the commissioners that haven't seen that impact analysis either, to go through that together jointly so that, you know, we have the consultant out and they go through everything that they found, because that deals with all of those kinds of issues that you're talking about.
I can add, I appreciate the thoughtfulness for that. And I think this is something that we, as a county and with individual jurisdictions, are talking about. How does the changes that we've experienced over the last 2 years impact community character? How does it impact our infrastructure? How does it impact even community nuisances like over congestion, or, you know, the things that we're all sort of feeling? And I think that's an important piece of the conversation. One of the things that is in the memo is the idea that this is a phased project. And so it isn't as if we know we're going to flip the light switch and have a whole new, you know, neighborhood to be addressing. So I think there's an opportunity within that phasing process to look at, you know, how does this have the impacts? How are we addressing those as we're moving through this?
Do you feel comfortable on the waterfront, kind of giving the, we're good to start working
I
forward?
think I'm just gonna be looking to that water agreement to be the vehicle to work out the level of control that I think that we need to get this thing going. And I know we're limited on time, but as far as capacity goes, at what point, you know, we've talked about this internally, is just, you know, is there any existing capacity in terms of our timeline that we could utilize to get something going, but not all 436 units? Could we get 50 units going? I mean, I know you still need to rezone and everything. So it's like, can you kind of, you know, are there any opportunities to like move ahead so that it's not another 5 years before we see units at Lake Hill?
Yeah, I think our hope is to be as aggressive as we can be with the rezoning process from a timing standpoint. The big holdups are going to be around water and sewer, because there isn't a, when you look at the road study that was done, you look at the impact analysis that was done, from a road perspective and from a sewer perspective, and I'm going to say from a water perspective, although I haven't looked at that recently, there's no additional capacity needed to do phase one of Lake Hill. And so, but we still have to go through the rezoning to get it entitled. And there's really very little, if any, difference in going through an entitlement that would lay out phases of the full project than it would be to go in and try to do a rezoning that would be only a portion of the project. So we're not going to save much of anything by doing that in terms of time. And then we just got to go back and go through that over and over again. And that's just an entitlement. It doesn't lay out what each and every phase would actually look like, because our expectation is over time, things will change. And so the need within the community is likely to change or morph in some way as we go from phase one to phase, 4B. And so we want to have flexibility within the entitlements process to be able to shift what that all looks like as we go forward. But we absolutely are looking at it as phasing in more bite-sized chunks to get something coming out of the ground sooner rather than later.
I hate to do this, but in spirit of time and keeping on schedule, but quick comments from you or Andrew online. I just want to give you guys quick, if you have 30 seconds, if not, kind of you're in support, we can keep these conversations going in a future meeting.
I'll try to make it quick. Yes, so how about if you're really just looking for the blessing of Frisco Town Council, I would say you pretty much have our blessing. We have a lot to work out, and deals make or break on all sorts of details, right? Those are the details there. And, so us looking at our infrastructure build out with or without Lake Hill, and then the cost being offset and all, and then otherwise forcing us to have to do it because of Lake Hill, where otherwise we wouldn't build that out. What we have to understand what kind of impact that is on us, what kind of impact that really is on our water rights, and to get from A to B, right? You know, and what's really the difference between, I don't know, digging down and going to Silverthorne? You know, so I would say we want to be at the table, right? This is a different council. We're happy to be here, but we have a whole lot to work out. And, you know, we also have community members that should be involved, architects and planners and such that live in this community that want to be involved in this process. It should be, and including our planning commission. You know, we're behind the idea of doing it, but we're a long way away from, you know, we can't start the first 50 units without knowing when we're going to dig up Summit Boulevard and rebuild our you know, the water plant. You know, that's got to be all part of it, right? So that's my part.
Hate to do it, but in the spirit of time, thank you. I think, does that help? Good clarification.
Yeah.
Glad we all got together.
Yeah, so my takeaway is that we're good to move forward with rezoning and good to continue to work with staff with regards to water agreement where we may try to lay out some of these details. And so nobody will be surprised when this shows up as a rezoning project at a planning commission meeting. That's the main thing I want to make sure of.
I believe that's what I heard as well. I would agree with that. Don't need
I'm-
to hear that.
Great,
Yeah.
great.
Thank you guys. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Andrew, have anything to- You gotta let Joanna know.
We got a lot going on.
All right. Let's get.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Get the sand district in here.
It's a little bit after 7. I apologize for being a few minutes late, but we just had a great conversation with the county commissioners. I'd like to take this time to call to order the regular meeting of the Frisco Town Council. Can I have the roll call, please?
Certainly. Mortensen.
Here.
Aronson.
Here.
Burley, absent. Fallon.
Here.
Held.
Here.
Incan.
Here.
Sherburne.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to take this moment quickly. It's been come to my attention. Councilmember Burley, as everyone knows, recently has had a new baby welcomed into this world. And sadly, our town code doesn't allow for maternity leave for council members. And so she's approaching the unexcused absences for council meetings. So with that, I'd like to request a motion from someone on council to excuse Councilmember Burley's recent absences. And we can do that with unanimous consent at this time, if there's a motion to excuse those absences. It's been moved by Councilmember Fallon. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Sherburne. Can you call the question, please?
Certainly. Mortensen.
Yes.
Aronson.
Yes.
Burley, absent. Fallon. Held.
Yes.
Incan.
Yes.
Sherburne.
Yes.
Thank you.
Part of business clarification, and we will work on updating town charter to reflect the current
Requires a
of life is not what it used to be. Moving on, next is mayor and council comments. I want to thank everyone who participated in the Mayor's Cup yesterday. The beautiful day to be out at the Raven Golf Club. Amazing amount of teams. The energy was high. I don't know the exact number yet, but from what it sounds like and what it looked like, it was another successful fundraising event for Building Hope, which is in the spirit of proclamation I'll be doing in a little bit. It couldn't be a better time to have that golf tournament. We appreciate everybody who took part and the sponsors, and I think it's a great community event and we'll continue to build on it. And if you haven't gotten a chance to join and play, sponsor team, come out next year. Maybe you'll see me out there. We'll see. For those who have, I've got golf pins, so it's proven. Any other mayor council comments? Moving on. If my, Tony, are there any additional staff updates this evening? No staff updates, thank you. This is one of the things I look forward to most in my job is that we get to honor really special people who are a part of the town of Frisco. We're going to do that this evening. Maggie, are you okay standing up while I read this? Or are you happy you're sitting there? It's a long one. People had a lot of good things to say to you. But so with that, I'm really honored and proud that we're going to present Frisco's Finest Award this evening to Maggie Cox. And I'm going to read this whole statement because I think it speaks to who she is as a person, to who she is to this town and to this community. So I'm not even gonna ask for you to bear with me. Enjoy this because she's a special person and is well deserved for this. So Maggie and her husband, Jim, moved to Colorado from Florida in 1986. Maggie enjoyed a long career as a computer programmer, starting with her first job with the Diners Club Financial. Her retirement in 2003 prompted their move from the Denver area to Summit County. Since then, Maggie has volunteered with various organizations and events in the county and has worked part-time in the community service-oriented jobs. Maggie started volunteering with the town of Frisco in June of 2014, helping with the recreation department at town athletic events and filling in at the Tubing Hill during busy holiday times. She became a regular at events such as the Frisco Barbecue, Town Cleanup, and the Soup Cup. In addition to events, Maggie has put in more than 1,000 hours of work scanning and digitally filing old building and planning permit files to bring the town of Frisco's community development department into the digital age. Town of Frisco staff have described Maggie as a kind, friendly, intelligent, motivating, inspiring, and helpful, and they consider her a part of the family. In addition to her volunteer work with the town, Maggie's numerous interests and talents have led her to offer a wide range of help within the community. Maggie volunteers at the Summit County Animal Shelter, where she helps socialize cats for adoption, and is a member of the Summit County Animal Response Team, which helps evacuate animals in the community during emergencies. She processes new books at the Summit County Library and volunteers at all book sales. She volunteers at charity events for the animals and people of the Summit County, also known as LAPS.
Excuse me.
And I will wait for that.
Thank you.
For several years, Maggie and Jim have adopted a section of the Summit County Rec Path near Keystone, which they've cleaned up and maintained throughout the summer months. Maggie has also given her time to several medical organizations performing clerical and aid duties for Bristlecone Health Services, Keystone. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you for the note. Find myself in there. So she's volunteered for medical organizations performing clerical aid duties, the Bristlecone Health Services, Keystone Medical Center, and Summit County Medical Center. She's helped the Summit County community in the senior center by providing medical rides and by volunteering at their rummage sale. Maggie has spent several years working with Summit Fire and EMS as a Fire Corps volunteer, curating and scanning historical materials for the organization's scrapbooks, digitizing the department's building plans, and setting off the fireworks. Retired Chief Jeff Marino, another Frisco Finest recipient, leaned on Maggie and Jim heavily for lots of tasks that fell outside of the duties and availability of our own town forces, he said. I don't think they've missed a single ice cream social or a safe summer kickoff in where they weren't involved, and they've always come to pitch in when needed. Maggie has also worked as a Summit County Deputy Coroner for a decade and put in volunteer work on top of her paid position there, undertaking administrative work. Other town staff, Cheryl Makata, says her unique skill and experience makes her so valuable to any organization or event that has been lucky to have her help. Her insights, knowledge, and get it done attitude are inspiring. We all should aspire to give back to our communities when life allows us. Maggie has said she's volunteered because she likes to keep busy in the variety of work and service in which she has participated in what keeps it interesting for her. She added, the more you do, the more you find to do. Maggie and Jim will be moving to Grand Junction at the end of September, and they will be greatly missed. And they have impacted Frisco and the Summit County community in ways that we will never be able to express our thanks. With that, Maggie, please. Read Volume 2 and Volume 3 if you guys want me to keep going. Planning Department, She's gonna scan these into our files now that Maggie's leaving.
No,
Okay.
thank you all. Frisco's been my favorite job for a number of years, and I will miss the folks.
We love you, Maggie. We can't believe you're leaving.
Thank you. Thank you.
Always lucky to do that. Next up, I'd like to open it up for public comment. Anyone wishing to make public comment this evening, you may do so now. Please be topic specific for anything that is not on this evening's agenda. Please state your address, the name and address for the record. Please keep your comments to no longer than 3 minutes. If you are joining us online, you can unmute your mic or use the raise your hand feature, and I will call on you then, but I'll start with those in chambers this evening. Would anyone like to make public comment? Please, yeah, give me stuff to the turn.
My name is Sarah Graham, and I am a business owner on Main Street, 619 Main Street, chiropractic health and acupuncture. Okay. I am here because there's a letter dated September 14th, 2021. Town Manager Tony O'Rourke sent a proposal to Frisco lodging businesses written by Council Member Andrew Aronson. Mr. Aronson stated he wishes to discuss a vaccine law proposal at the Tuesday, September 14th and 28th meetings. I am here as a concerned business owner on Main Street. I found this letter extremely frightening. To suggest our local businesses police their patrons or experience such massive fines is clearly authoritarian. It is shocking anyone on our local council would even suggest this burden on local businesses, particularly during such a time of struggle. Medical freedom is important to me, as it is to most Americans. The town council is not my doctor, and nor is any Frisco lodging provider. It is none of your business why one would choose to not vaccinate. But as a Frisco medical office owner, I have seen firsthand the damage it has done to many locals. Science evolves, and people are right to be cautious while we gather data. The undercover of Night Way, this letter was distributed a day before council meets, as well as the stated intention of hopefully rushing through this law during the September 14th and 28th meetings, is incredibly disconcerting. No time was given to fellow businesses and citizens to ponder the ramifications of this proposal, and with total disregard to natural immunity. Perhaps you feel this policy is valid because you're fearful your vaccine will not protect you. If this is the case, then you must believe there is an equal chance of catching SARS-CoV-2 from a vaccinated or unvaccinated person. So why the segregation, Council Member Andrew Aronson? Why do you hold such an Aryan view toward the dirty unvaccinated? Are you proposing discriminating policy based on fear and not facts? Fact. During the height of the pandemic in the year of 2020, pre-vaccine, mind you, our county was full of tourists looking to escape to the mountains and remotely work. But despite this overload of tourists, we had nurses furloughed. The coroner reported 1 COVID death and 9 times the suicide in our entire county. Does this stat seem reasonable to justify such a financial burden on local businesses and visitors to our area? And what is next? Restaurants, grocers, salons, asking for your papers at the door?
30 seconds.
3 seconds.
30 seconds.
Okay.
Sure.
All right. Here's a
Public
little
comment.
bit for Andrew on the Holocaust.
Have to run now. Make public comment this evening. You know, there's some online. Chance of- Did you object? Yeah, please.
Along the same lines, my question is, if you implement this policy for residences, Airbnb, hotels, and so forth, how does that protect the community? I don't understand how that helps if you're not implementing the same protocol for restaurants, shops, and so forth. I also work on Main Street in Frisco. I've lived here all my life. And I just feel that this entire proposal is ridiculous and uncalled for. The amount of work and the policy itself would create such a huge problem for any hotel or Airbnb management company. And again, I don't see the benefit of that if you're continuing to allow unvaccinated or whoever in restaurants and other stores. They're walking up and down the street just like any guest of a hotel would be. So I totally object to the entire proposal. Thank you. Oh, my name's Candy Snyder.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Go online, I know.
You've got two.
Okay, I see, they're labeled on here as, hello sailor, if you could introduce yourself, for the record, please, and you have 3 minutes, once we get you unmuted. There you go. Can you hear us?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep. And your name for the
Okay.
record, please, and also 3 minutes.
Sorry, 1 second. I'm having trouble. The speaker I was using to do my audio just died, so I'm kind of trying to get my phone to work so I can do this again properly. My name, okay, if you guys can hear me, my name for the record is Josh Walker. I live at 200 Granite Street. I'm also an operator of a property management company around here, and I would just like to echo the comments of the previous two commenters. You know, I think what they said doesn't bear repeating. I think it's pretty clear in and of itself. I would also just like to add that, you know, the logistical challenges for a small operator such as myself to actually perform this enforcement activity is really going to be essentially next to impossible. And, you know, I believe that there are some statutes based on some research that I did in the brief time allowed from learning of this letter to the current meeting, that I don't even believe that it's constitutional to draft private citizens into enforcing the laws of the county. I believe that would be the job of law enforcement. And, you know, it's simply unconscionable to enforce those kinds of penalties on somebody like myself, who my business is owned by myself and my mother. We're the only two people, and we see, you know, thousands of guests every year in the properties we manage. And so I don't know how you could possibly, we would spend all day doing it essentially. And it's just not, it's an undue burden on our business without any sort of like compensation for our time. So with that, I secede the rest of my time. Thank you.
Okay, hello, my name is Tom Castrino. I live at 60 Peak One Circle. I'd like to address this issue of requiring short-term visitors renting to show evidence of vaccination. I think that's a bad idea for a lot of the reasons that were previously mentioned, and not really clear on what the end game is. If the intent is to slow spread or avoid overwhelm of the medical care system, but I think it just really sets a bad precedent and puts a lot of burden on lodging operators. And, you know, even if you said, well, nobody has to double check and it doesn't become a violation until they show up and need care and they don't have a vaccine, then they get fined. That's the enforcement. Even at that level, I still think it's ill-advised. So I just wanted to voice opposition, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Kevin Lovett.
Kevin Lovett.
Hi, thanks for having us and allowing comment. I'm Kevin Lovett. I'm the owner of Summit Resort Group Property Management. We manage a number of homeowners associations and rental units, long-term and short-term in Frisco. I just want to echo the previous objections. I don't need to repeat them, but I do think this is a bad idea. It will cause incredible burden for us as property managers. We are not medical experts. We are not police. We are property managers. It will create undue burden and expense, and it will create incredible ill will with our rental guests that we do rely on for income here for all of us business owners in Frisco and in Summit County. So I just wanted to state my objection. Thanks again for allowing comment.
Kevin, I appreciate it.
Not see any other hands raised.
Anyone else? Alderman Chambers, yeah, please.
Thank you.
Hotels and have guests that ask them questions about how to comply. I would like the council to be able to answer these questions for us. Which vaccine is safe? First question.
Right.
Bring
Thank
up
you.
to high altitude. We know that myocarditis is a known side effect. What if you have medical, what do you do with them? With a religious subject.
Sorry, can you just put a little closer to the microphone? It's up there. Kind of sensitive here. Yeah, no, it doesn't.
There's been a lot of voicing of concerns about who's going to police this whole thing. I think we also need to be prepared to answer those questions about safety and efficacy. If anyone here can tell me which is the safest vaccine and the most effective, I'd love to hear that information. We've been shown that vaccines are not effective at stopping the spread of coronavirus. They might keep us from getting really sick, but we don't know who exactly they keep from really getting really sick. So just something to think about. And the last question I have is on the business side. What is the budget that the town will be considering for the inevitable lawsuits? As a business owner and taxpayer, I would like to know that. Thank you. Thank you.
Anyone else in chambers this evening wish to make public comment? Go back. Anyone online also wish to make public comment this evening?
I don't see any other raised hands.
Seeing no additional public comment, I will close public comment at this time. And I'd just like to, we don't always normally address public comment, but I think it's really important to do so this evening. And I'm going to do that. And I'm going to do that with an apology and also with a thank you, because I think I will take some of this responsibility for the confusion that is out there around this. And this is one of those classic cases where a very well-intentioned idea and goal went offline and did not happen the way we wanted. And throughout this whole process of COVID, something I've prided myself, this council and this town on is trying to be as open and engaging with everyone in this community. And we've had good dialogue. And this was done in the intent and the spirit of trying to keep that dialogue going with an informative letter of an idea of one of our council members. But it was not rolled out, explained, or done well. And that is on me, and I apologize. But the good news is what we do as government is we listen to our people and we have open and fair meetings. So there was nothing on this evening's agenda for this conversation. So that's why all of public comment was absolutely appropriate. We aren't discussing it tonight as a council. You can look to the next agenda to see if it will be on there. I do not know at this point, but your feedback has been heard, and that's the public process, and that's what I appreciate. So thank you for being a part of it. I would just say, know that it was done in the spirit and the intent of trying to be informative and engage public process and not blindside any business owner in our community. The business owners are what gotten us through this pandemic successfully and healthy. And by no means did we intend to blindside you or undermine you or make your jobs more difficult. It was done in the spirit of trying to say, can we start a conversation? And I did that wrong, and I take that. So thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for sharing it and reaching out to your fellow business owners. I will do better. We will do better. But by no means was our intent to blindside anyone with this. And I think, thank you for being part of the process. But also, as you all said, our community health and safety is paramount. And that was part of what the idea of the conversation was based in. And we will continue to put the health and safety first. But we heard you, and I heard you. So thank you all for that. And I appreciate everyone's time in coming and speaking this evening. If you aren't on the town email address list to get updates to the council agenda, please do so. That's the best way to stay informed and know what we are discussing. So at those times as well, you can weigh in because we want that. And we always know something is going on when people are here in council chambers because they're not always well-attended meetings. So thank you all. With that, we'll be moving on to the next agenda. item. So thank you.
Hey, Hunter, I just want to thank you for what you said and for the fact that you said it, because I agree 100% that this was intended to spark a conversation, not be an agenda item. And so thank you to everybody for coming and thank you for what you said, Hunter.
That's Councilmember Aronson for those who don't know who the voice from the sky was. So thank you all. I appreciate it. Have a good rest of your night. Unless you want to stay for the rest of the meeting, you're more than welcome. Already blown past half of my agenda. One started tonight, so I'm gonna slow down a little bit. Looking at my proclamations.
Do you need a paper copy?
I can do it. Close some windows. Okay, so with that, following up, we do have one proclamation this evening, as I already mentioned with our the Mayor's Cup to build fundraise for Building Hope. I'd like to talk about September being Suicide Prevention Month, and I have a proclamation follows. The town of Frisco proclaimed September 2021 Suicide Prevention Month in Frisco, Colorado. Whereas in the United States, suicide is the second leading cause of death among adolescents and the 10th leading cause for adults. And whereas in the United States, more than 47,500 people died by suicide in 2019. There is one death by suicide every 11 minutes, and over 300,000 visits to emergency rooms are caused by self-harm injuries each year. And yearly, more than 12 million people seriously think about suicide. And whereas in Summit County, the suicide rate is 17.4 deaths per 100,000 people, which is higher than the national rate of 14.5 deaths per 100,000 people. 9 people died by suicide in our community in 2020. And from January 1st, August 18th, 2021, 4 community members have died by suicide. Whereas maintaining an inclusive, safe, supportive community is consistent with the town of Frisco's goals, and suicide prevention is consistent with many other efforts to protect the safety of our residents. And whereas a person's mental health can affect every aspect of life and can hinder the ability to enjoy life and thrive in our community. And whereas a suicide can significantly impact other youth, families, and the whole community. And whereas Building Hope Summit County, a community coalition comprised of representatives from the Summit School District, behavioral health organizations, county agencies, law enforcement, nonprofit organizations, and the community at large, is dedicated to reducing the frequency of suicide attempts and deaths and the pain from those affected by death by suicide through educational programs, youth prevention programs, and intervention services, and has identified September 2021, as Suicide Prevention Month, and recognizes suicide as a critical public health problem in Colorado, Summit County, and Frisco, and the need to ensure accessible behavioral health services for all children, youth, individuals, and families in Summit County, and implementing best practice in reducing suicide risks for citizens of all ages and all backgrounds. And suicide prevention is a broad community problem in need of a broad community solution that includes public awareness, focused prevention programming at all levels in Summit County. Whereas the town of Frisco continues to be impacted by suicide and strives to prevent another loss of life by strengthening economic support, promoting activities and events that connect the community, identifying and supporting people who are at risk, supporting organizations that provide access to and delivery of suicide care, encourage greater residents' awareness regarding available crisis intervention services, and whereas Frisco Town Council wants every community member to know that they are valued, that better days are always ahead, and that seeking mental health care is a heroic act in support of your community. Now, therefore, September 2021 is hereby proclaimed to be Suicide Prevention Month in Frisco, Colorado, dated this 14th day of September. Just like to also say this is very personal. I've lost too many friends and loved ones to this, so it means a lot that we take this stand. So thank you. Reach out to your friends. We all need it. We've all suffered. So thank you all. Moving on this evening's agenda with that, excuse me. Note the consent agenda, and perhaps a motion. Move for approval by Councilmember Brown. Is there a second? Second. Discussion on the motion. Call the question, please.
Aronson,
Yes.
Burley, absent. Fallon,
Yes.
Held,
Yes.
Incan,
Yeah.
Sherburne,
Yes.
Mortensen.
Yes.
Thank you.
New business this evening, agenda item number 1, is a proposal for federal advocacy services. I'll open up the public hearing, turn over to staff and our town manager, Tony O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Tonight we have Mara Sheldon, just to set the stage for her. As you recognize, the town has many challenges and opportunities as represented in the town council strategic plan. And given the town's finite resources, I think it's imperative that the town look at opportunities to leverage those finite resources with public-private partnerships. One of the greatest ones, of course, is working with other governments. To that end, I would recommend expanding the council's current relationship with Squire Patton and Boggs, which represents this town and other towns in the county at the state level, but to do it at the federal level. And particular areas of interest that would be addressed at the federal level for funding and legislative advocacy would be wildland mitigation, affordable housing, infrastructure, and environmental sustainability, or as phrasing it, climate resiliency. I think all of those are particularly important to the town of Frisco. So this would be a great opportunity. This contract would not be inexpensive. It's $100,000. I've had other relationships like this in other communities and far exceeded that investment in return with federal funding for a host of projects, from infrastructure to environmental issues to, again, fire mitigation. And in addition,